Hello guys, welcome to the Fiction Moon. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Harry was a dragon progenitor reborn in Privet Drive and his magic aura leveled the entire street at age 5? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The rain had been falling on Privet Drive for 3 days straight when Harry Potter decided he was tired of the cupboard. Not tired in the way a normal 5-year-old gets tired of a place, restless, bored, wanting his toys. Harry didn't have toys. He was tired in the way a banked coal gets tired of being contained, in the way pressure builds behind a dam that was never meant to hold what's pressing against it. He didn't have words for it yet. He just knew that something behind his ribs had been getting heavier all week, and that the heaviness had started to feel less like weight and more like wanting. He sat with his knees pulled to his chest, back against the wall where the pipes ran warm in winter, and listened to the Dursleys move around above him. Uncle Vernon's footsteps, that particular flat-footed thunder that meant he'd had a bad day at the office. Aunt Petunia's quick, precise clicking from kitchen to hallway to sitting room, never wasted, never wandering. Dudley's galloping run from one end of the upstairs to the other, shaking the ceiling. The television mumbling about weather and traffic. Normal sounds. The sounds of a house that had decided, with great thoroughness, that Harry didn't belong in it. He'd been thinking about fire lately. Not in a destructive way, or at least, not in a way that felt destructive to him. It was more like remembering something he'd never actually seen. He would close his eyes in the dark of the cupboard and there would be this image behind his eyelids, a sky so wide it had no edges, and something enormous moving through it, and below, far below, a world that was still young enough to be soft. He didn't know what to do with the image. It came and went. Sometimes it brought warmth with it. Sometimes it brought a feeling so old and so large that Harry would have to press both hands flat against the cupboard wall just to remember where he was. This morning, the image had been more vivid than usual. He'd woken up from it to find that the pipes behind him were glowing faintly orange. He'd stared at them for a long time. Then he'd pressed his palm flat against one. It wasn't hot enough to burn, it was hot in the way a living thing is hot, like pressing your hand against someone's chest and feeling their heartbeat. The orange light had pulsed once, twice, and then faded when Aunt Petunia knocked on the cupboard door and told him to come out and make breakfast. He'd made the eggs. He'd made the toast. He'd poured the juice and set the table and stood quietly while Dudley complained that his eggs were wrong and Uncle Vernon looked at Harry the way he always looked at Harry, like he was a problem that hadn't been solved yet and was becoming more expensive by the day. Harry had looked back. This was the thing that made Uncle Vernon most uncomfortable. Harry looked back. He always had. Even as a toddler, apparently, Aunt Petunia had once muttered to someone on the telephone that there was something wrong with the boy's eyes, and Harry had been standing right there, and he'd wondered what she meant, but not very hard, because he already suspected the answer was nothing is wrong, I just see you clearly, and you don't like that. He'd gone back to the cupboard after breakfast. That was the rule. Chores done, back to the cupboard. Don't be seen unless useful. That was when the heaviness got worse. It started as a pressure in his chest, not painful, exactly, more like the moment before you sneeze but in every cell of his body at once. The orange warmth crept back up the pipes. The thin mattress on the floor of the cupboard shivered slightly, not enough to make a sound, just enough that Harry felt it. He pressed his hands flat on his thighs and breathed carefully, in and out, the way he'd learned to breathe when things got bad, when the cupboard got too small and the dark got too thick. The breathing didn't help this time. Because this time, the thing in his chest wasn't fear. It wasn't anxiety. It was something that didn't have any edges to it, something that recognized the small wooden door and the low ceiling and the smell of dust and the sounds of people living their lives directly overhead, and found all of it, not cruel, not unbearable, just profoundly insufficient. Harry let out a long, slow breath. The cupboard door came off its hinges. Then the wall behind it. Then the wall behind that. He didn't feel himself stand up. He was just suddenly standing, in open air, in the rain, where the hallway used to be. The house was still making structural sounds, the particular groan of load-bearing things reconsidering their commitments. The roof was intact but tilted. He could see into the kitchen from where he stood, and the kitchen table had slid 6 feet to the left, and all 4 of Aunt Petunia's houseplants had bloomed simultaneously, impossible red flowers that dripped light the way candles drip wax. He could also see that Aunt Petunia had pressed herself into the corner between the refrigerator and the wall, and that she was very, very pale. "Harry," she said, and it came out wrong, too high, too thin, nothing like her usual voice. "Sorry," he said. He meant it, mostly. Then the pressure exhaled again, a second wave, slower, deeper, like something that had been waiting patiently behind the first, and number 4, Privet Drive stopped being a house. He didn't watch it happen. He was watching the sky. The clouds had changed color. That brilliant deep amber red that lived behind his eyelids, it was up there now, threading through the gray rain clouds like ink dropped in water. The rain itself was warm. He hadn't noticed that before, but it had been warm all morning, and getting warmer, and now it wasn't rain so much as mist, hanging low and glowing faintly, and the whole street was very quiet. Harry turned around. Privet Drive, the entirety of it, the neat row of identical houses with their identical lawns and identical gravel drives and identical lives conducted at a thoroughly respectable volume, was not there anymore. There was a crater, but that wasn't quite right either, because a crater implies violence, implies something striking from outside. This was more like the street had been exhaled on and found wanting. The ground was smooth where the houses had been, warm and faintly darkened, as though the earth itself had taken a slow, satisfied breath. Trees at the end of the road were still standing but their leaves had turned gold, not autumn gold, something older, a gold that seemed to generate its own light. The Desleys were standing on a small island of original pavement about 20 feet away, all 3 of them, apparently unhurt. Dudley was crying. Vernon was making a sound that wasn't quite a word yet. Petunia was staring at Harry with an expression that had moved past shock and arrived somewhere much quieter and stranger, something that might have been recognition, if you looked at it long enough. Harry walked over to them. The warm mist curled around his ankles. The ground didn't burn under his feet. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Vernon made the not quite a word sound again. "Dudley?" Harry looked at his cousin. "Dudley. Are you hurt?" Dudley stopped crying long enough to say no, and then resumed crying, louder. "Okay," Harry said. He turned and sat down cross-legged on the warm ground where number 6 used to be, because he felt like sitting, and his legs were suddenly a little tired, and there was something deeply interesting happening in the sky that he wanted to watch without being distracted. He sat there for 40 minutes. He knew it was 40 minutes because he'd always been able to feel time move, not in a clock-reading way, but in the same way you can feel weather coming in your joints, a kind of internal calibration that had never been explained to him and that he'd never bothered explaining to anyone else. 40 minutes. He watched the amber leave the clouds. He felt the warmth in the ground underneath him slowly, reluctantly, dial itself back down. He listened to the street, the former street, settle and cool. He was aware, at some point, that people had gathered at the edges of what used to be the cul-de-sac. He could hear sirens in the distance, though they seemed to be having trouble getting closer, as if the roads themselves had developed an opinion about urgency and found it insufficient. He was also aware, in a quieter, more specific way, of several presences arriving that were not policemen and not neighbors and not anyone who'd driven here in an ordinary car. He didn't turn around until the footsteps were close enough that ignoring them would have been theatrical. There were 3 of them. One was a woman in lime green robes who looked like she wanted very badly to take notes and was restraining herself with visible effort. One was a short man with a bowler hat and an expression of such profound official distress that his face had basically given up on having a normal configuration. And the third was a tall man with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles, wearing deep blue robes that seemed to be a slightly different shade wherever the light hit them, walking slightly ahead of the other 2 with the particular ease of someone who is never in a hurry because things wait for them rather than the other way around. Harry looked at the tall man. The tall man looked at Harry. "Hello," Harry said. "Hello," said Albus Dumbledore, and he lowered himself smoothly to sit on the warm ground across from Harry, not with the careful effort of an old man, but with the deliberate intention of someone choosing not to stand over a 5-year-old on what was already a complicated morning. He crossed his legs. He set his hands on his knees. His blue eyes were very bright behind the spectacles. "That's quite a morning you've had." "I didn't mean to break the houses," Harry said. This was true. "I know. The Dursleys aren't hurt. I can see that." The woman in lime green had produced a clipboard from somewhere and was scribbling on it with a quill that seemed to be making additional notes on its own initiative. The man with the bowler hat had not moved from the edge of the crater and appeared to be experiencing a kind of spiritual crisis. Harry studied Dumbledore. He was used to adults who talked to him like he was a problem to be managed, minimized, contained. This man was doing something different. He was looking at Harry like you look at something that interests you, genuinely, without agenda, with that particular quality of attention that can't really be faked because most people don't bother. "You're the one who left me here," Harry said. A pause, not awkward, more like a breath. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I believed it was the safest option for you." Harry looked at the smooth warm ground where the Dursleys' house had been. Then he looked at the other end of the street. Then he looked back at Dumbledore. He didn't say anything, but something in his expression completed the observation quite thoroughly. Dumbledore made a small sound that might, in a different context, have been a laugh. "Yes. I'm beginning to revise that assessment." "What is a Hogwarts?" Harry asked. Dumbledore blinked. It was the first time something had surprised him since he'd sat down. "I beg your pardon. I keep hearing that word inside my head, this morning. Hogwarts." Harry tilted his head slightly. "Is it a place?" "It is," Dumbledore said, recovering his composure with the ease of long practice. "A school. For people like you. Are there people like me?" Another pause. Longer this time. Dumbledore took his spectacles off and polished them with a fold of his robe, and Harry had the impression this was a gesture he used when he needed a moment to decide how honest to be. "There are people with magic," Dumbledore said finally, putting his spectacles back on. "Wizards. Witches. Children who can do remarkable things." He looked at Harry steadily. "And then there is you. And I must confess, Harry, and I say this as someone who has lived an extremely long time and seen a remarkable number of things, I am not entirely certain what category you fall into." Harry thought about the image behind his eyelids. The edgeless sky. The enormous thing moving through it. The young, soft world below. "I had a dream," Harry said. "A big dream. About something very old." "What did it feel like?" "Like remembering." He paused. "Like when you forget a word and then you remember it and your whole brain goes, oh, yes, that one." He considered. "Except the word was everything." Dumbledore was very still. The man with the bowler hat had apparently gathered enough courage to approach, because his footsteps were getting closer, and they were accompanied by the particular sound of someone composing an official statement in their head as they walked. "Headmaster Dumbledore, the minister has requested, that is to say, the situation requires, there are protocols, obviously, Clause 7 of the statute, Cornelius," Dumbledore said, without turning around. "Have you ever considered the value of simply standing quietly and observing?" Cornelius Fudge, because it was him, the junior minister for magical catastrophes, who would be senior minister and then minister for magic within the decade, and who was already exhibiting the particular blend of ambition and anxiety that would define his career, stopped walking. He stood. He was quiet for approximately 4 seconds, which seemed to cost him something. "The street," he said. "The entire street, headmaster. 12 houses. 4 of them Muggle occupied, the rest we'd actually already cleared under containment protocol, yes, the protocol was in place, the woman in lime green said, looking up from her clipboard. The monitoring team had flagged elevated readings from this location for the past 2 years, actually. We had a Category 3 alert running as of last Thursday. She looked at her notes. We subsequently revised it to Category 3 on Friday. Then Saturday. By Sunday it was something we don't actually have a category for, so Whitmore in the classification department invented one on the spot. He called it Category Threshold Breach. She said this last part with the air of someone reporting a minor absurdity. His memo came through this morning at 7:30. What time did the event occur? Dumbledore asked. 8:14, said Harry. He'd felt it precisely. Everyone looked at him. 8:14, the woman confirmed, checking her clipboard. She looked at Harry with an expression that was trying very hard to be professional and not quite getting there. That's, yes. Correct. She cleared her throat. I'm Arabella, no, sorry. Aura Marchetti, Magical Incidents Division. She stuck her hand out, seemed to realize this was an unusual gesture to offer to a 5-year-old sitting cross-legged on the ruins of a residential street, and then decided to go through with it anyway. Harry shook it. Her hand was warm. He noticed that the quill on her clipboard was writing remarkable composure in the margins without her permission. We'll need to relocate you, Fudge said, addressing Dumbledore rather than Harry. Obviously. Can't leave him, can't just. He gestured at the crater with both hands. I'll need clothes, Harry said. Fudge looked at him. What? If I'm being relocated? I'll need clothes. I don't have many. He paused. Actually, all my clothes are currently in the house that isn't a house anymore, so I have none, actually. Dumbledore produced a set of robes from somewhere in the depths of his own, a child set, dark blue, perfectly sized, which was either foresight or magic or both. He held them out to Harry. Harry stood, took them, looked at them. They were very nice. He looked at Dumbledore. You were planning to come here today, Harry said. Before this happened. I was, Dumbledore agreed. Why? I've been monitoring you, Harry. From a distance. I wanted to speak with you before the readings became, he glanced at Marchetti's clipboard, before a new category needed to be invented. You were late, Harry said. I was. A genuine smile, then. Not the kind with layers behind it, just a plain one. I apologize. Harry put the robes on over his pajamas. They fit perfectly. They smelled faintly of something that might have been libraries or might have been starlight, he couldn't quite decide. Where are we going? He asked. I was thinking, Dumbledore said, standing in one smooth motion, that we might go somewhere with comfortable chairs, and you might tell me about your dream. The big one? The big one. Harry looked at the Dursleys one more time. They were standing exactly where he'd left them, 20 feet away on their small island of pavement. Vernon's color had made a partial recovery. Dudley had stopped crying and was staring at Harry with his mouth open. Petunia was still watching him with that strange quiet expression, and Harry studied her for a moment because it was the most interesting thing on her face he'd ever seen, like she was looking at something she'd always known was coming and had spent 15 years pretending wasn't. He walked over to them. The 3 adults from the ministry sort of drifted after him, hovering at a diplomatic distance. I'm going to go with them, Harry told Petunia. She swallowed. Yes. Are you going to be all right? She looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes. Are you going to be all right? It was the most she'd ever asked him. It was probably the most she knew how to ask. Yes, he said. He thought about it. I think I've always been all right. I just didn't have enough room. She didn't say anything else. He didn't expect her to. He turned and walked back toward Dumbledore, and the warm mist curled around his ankles again, and the gold trees at the end of the road shivered in a wind that wasn't really a wind, and somewhere very high up in the changed sky above Privet Drive, something that had been sleeping for a very long time rolled over and opened one enormous, ancient, amber eye. Dumbledore saw Harry's expression change for just a moment as they walked, not pain, not fear, just that particular look of someone hearing a sound that nobody else in the room can hear. He filed it away carefully, behind the spectacles and the long beard and the particular quality of stillness that had made him difficult to read for 150 years. He was, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely uncertain what was going to happen next. He found it, to his slight surprise, quite invigorating. De opérat, Marchetti took Fudge, and Dumbledore held out his hand to Harry, and Harry took it without hesitation, which Dumbledore noted, with a soft crack that left behind only the warm ground and the golden trees and the Dursley standing in the rain, and the former cul-de-sac of Privet Drive settling quietly into whatever it was going to be now. 3 streets away, a retired squib named Arabella Figg, who had been paid to watch Harry Potter from a careful distance for 5 years and who had filed 47 reports about the boy without ever quite capturing what it felt like to be around him, looked out her window at the amber sky and said, quietly, to no one in particular, "Oh. So that's what he is." Her 17 cats all turned to look in the same direction at the same time. She went and put the kettle on. The place Dumbledore took Harry was not Hogwarts, it was too soon for that, and the school year didn't start until September, and Harry was 5 years old, and even Dumbledore was not quite prepared to walk a 5-year-old into a castle full of students who would immediately begin writing letters home. Instead it was a place called the headmaster's sitting room, which existed in a location that Harry's 5-year-old brain filed simply as somewhere with a lot of fireplaces and no corners, though when he was older he'd understand it as one of several Dumbledore-maintained sanctuaries connected to Hogwarts' outer wards but separate from the castle itself. It had, as promised, comfortable chairs. Harry chose the one closest to the fireplace and immediately curled his legs up under him. The fire acknowledged this by burning slightly more orange than red. Dumbledore sat opposite and summoned tea and a plate of biscuits that Harry ate with the focused efficiency of someone who hadn't had a proper breakfast and wasn't going to be coy about it. "Tell me about the dream," Dumbledore said. So Harry told him. It took a while, because he'd been having versions of it for as long as he could remember, since before he could have named it a dream, really, since it had been more a quality of the dark when he closed his eyes, a texture to the inside of his sleep. But as he'd gotten older, the images had sharpened. The sky that had no edges. The speed of moving through it, the rightness of speed, the sense of being a thing perfectly designed for something and doing that thing without constraint. Below, a world that was still being decided. Seas that weren't sure where to stop. Mountains growing in real time. The air full of a smell like metal and heat and potential. And the fire. He always came back to the fire. Not the fire of burning things down, of destruction, of harm, but the fire of making things, of being the source, of feeling the brightness gather behind your sternum and then letting it out in one long, clean breath, and watching what it touched become more than it had been. That was the part that made his chest ache when he woke up. Not longing, exactly. More like recognition of something temporarily mislaid. "And there are others," he said. "In the dream. Others like me, like whatever I was. Not the same, but related. They come to me sometimes. In the dream. What do they do?" Harry thought about it. "They listen," he said. "Or they argue. Or they fly in patterns I'm supposed to know what the patterns mean. I think I do know. When I'm there, I know. I wake up and it goes." He ate the last biscuit. "It's frustrating. I imagine," Dumbledore said. He had been listening with his full attention for the last 20 minutes, and his tea had gone cold, and he hadn't touched it. "Do you know what it means?" Harry asked. "I have a theory," Dumbledore said. "Tell me. I'd like to find out more first." Harry looked at him. "You could just tell me the theory and I could tell you if it's right." A pause. "You believe you'd know?" "I believe I'd recognize it. Like a word." He tilted his head. You know things about me that you're not saying. You knew my parents, I think. You put me with the Dursleys. Yes. And you have a plan. Or you had one. I did, Dumbledore said. I confess the morning has given it some structural complications. Harry looked at the fire. Are you afraid of me? The question landed without accusation, without challenge, pure curiosity, asked by a child who was accustomed to reading adults and had learned to ask the questions they were dancing around. No, Dumbledore said. Most people will be, Harry said. When they find out about Privet Drive. Some will. Will they try to control me? Some will try that, yes. Harry nodded, like this was a reasonable weather forecast for the coming season. They won't be able to, he said, not with any heat, just stating a fact the way you state that rain is wet or fire is hot. But I don't want to hurt anyone doing it. That's the part I'm working out. How to be, he paused, looking for the word. How to be here. In this size. He held up his hands, small hands, 5-year-old hands with a healing cut on one knuckle from the corner of the cupboard wall, and looked at them with an expression that was very old and very young at the same time. This is a very small size. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the particular quality of someone saying something they mean completely. I know. And I'm sorry that I put you in smaller circumstances than even this size deserved. A pause. I will try to do better. Harry looked at him for a long moment, with those eyes that Petunia had said were wrong in the sense that they were much too steady and much too clear and saw far too much for any face they'd ever been in. Okay, he said. Do you have more biscuits? Dumbledore summoned more biscuits. Harry ate them. Outside the windows, this sitting room's windows looked onto something that might have been the Scottish Highlands or might have been somewhere that didn't entirely exist. The sky had gone back to an ordinary grey, the rain falling in ordinary lines, and nowhere in the visible landscape was there any amber or gold or the sense of something vast breathing slowly overhead. Just the Highlands and the rain, and a fire burning orange bright in a grate, and a very old wizard and a 5-year-old boy sharing a plate of biscuits while the magical world, 6 counties in 7 directions, received the readings from Privet Drive and collectively began to revise everything it thought it knew about the nature of the threat landscape. In Gringotts Bank in London, 3 floors below ground, in a chamber that hadn't been opened in 400 years, a golden door that no one had successfully explained the purpose of vibrated exactly once, very softly, and then went still. In Hogwarts Castle, in the headmaster's office, 14 of the 16 portraits of former headmasters woke from their painted sleep simultaneously and looked at the same wall without explanation. The remaining 2, older portraits, in frames with no nameplates, had been awake for some time already, and were whispering to each other in a language that even the other portraits couldn't place. And in the Department of Mysteries, 3 levels below the Ministry of Magic, in a room that the department's own employees weren't entirely sure they'd been in, a stone basin filled with silver liquid began to glow very gently at its edges, and the silver rippled in a pattern that made the 3 unspeakables who happened to be present take several large steps backward and stand very close together, and none of them said anything, because there wasn't a word for it in any protocol they'd been trained with. The word, had they known it, was very old. It translated, roughly, to, "He is awake." Chapter 2, The letter comes early. The Ministry of Magic sent its first official delegation on a Wednesday. Harry knew they were coming before they knocked. He'd felt them operating into the lane outside the safe house, 3 distinct pops with that particular ministry quality to them, officious and slightly rushed, like people who'd rehearsed the walk to the door but hadn't quite decided what to say once they got there. He was sitting at the kitchen table eating porridge when the knock came, and he didn't look up. Dumbledore had arranged a house in Wiltshire, a wide, low-ceilinged cottage that sat at the edge of a proper forest and had the kind of magical wards layered into its walls that made the air inside feel slightly pressurized, like the inside of something that was paying close attention. It had a bedroom with an actual bed, which Harry had spent the first 2 nights simply lying in and staring at the ceiling with the particular feeling of someone who'd been given something they'd wanted for so long that wanting it had become structural, and now that it was here, they weren't sure what to do with their wanting. He'd slept well, eventually. Dreamed big. Woke up with warm hands. Dumbledore's associate, a quiet witch named Professor McGonagall who wore tartan and had a quality of stillness that Harry found immediately interesting, had been staying in the cottage as well, ostensibly to help Harry adjust to basic magical education, actually to observe. Harry didn't mind. He liked her. She was honest in a way that didn't make a performance of itself, and when she'd asked him on the first morning what he already knew how to do, and he'd shown her, she'd gone very quiet and then said, in a perfectly level voice, "Right. Well. We'll skip the introductory material then," and gone to find a different book. He was halfway through his porridge when Dumbledore came downstairs and said, "The Ministry is here. They'd like to speak with you." "I know," Harry said. McGonagall appeared in the doorway behind Dumbledore, already in her formal robes, with an expression that suggested she'd prepared for this and found the preparation insufficient. "You don't have to speak with them if you'd prefer not to," Dumbledore said. "I know," Harry said again. He ate one more spoonful of porridge. "They'll just keep coming if I don't." He pushed back from the table. "Let them in." There were 3 of them, a senior undersecretary named Umbridge who was pink and soft-looking in the way that certain dangerous things are soft-looking, a tall wizard from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement named Scrimgeour who had the watchful, measuring quality of someone used to assessing threats, and a young man from the Department of Education who kept dropping his parchment and was clearly there to take notes and was having a very difficult time. They came into the sitting room. Harry came in from the kitchen and sat in the armchair by the window, which was his chair now, the one the fire seemed to know about. He looked at the 3 of them. Umbridge smiled. It was the kind of smile that a face produces when it has decided smiling is tactically necessary. "Harry, dear, don't do that," Harry said pleasantly. She blinked. "I beg your pardon." "That voice. The soft one. You use it when you want someone to feel smaller." He looked at her with those 2 clear eyes. "I don't feel smaller. So it's just wasting everyone's time." Umbridge's smile stayed in place with a visible effort. Scrimgeour made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. "We're here," Scrimgeour said, taking over with the brisk ease of a man who preferred directness anyway, because the Ministry has a legal and security interest in understanding what happened on Privet Drive 4 days ago. 12 residential properties were affected. The statute of secrecy required a significant memory modification operation covering approximately 400 Muggles in the surrounding area. He sat down without being invited, the note-taker scrambling for a chair beside him, Umbridge settling primly onto the settee. "We'd like to understand the nature and extent of what occurred." "I breathed," Harry said. A pause. "You breathed," Scrimgeour repeated. "I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I was just," Harry considered how to explain it to people who were apparently going to write it down. "I was contained somewhere too small for too long, and something needed to move, and it moved. The houses got in the way." He paused. "I'm sorry about that." "You're sorry," Umbridge said, in a voice that had very carefully removed all the soft from it, which Harry found significantly more honest and thus more comfortable. "Harry, what you're describing, the magical output required to affect a physical structure in that way, let alone 12 of them, there are grown wizards, trained, experienced, the most powerful people I have ever," she stopped. Restarted. "What we're trying to understand is whether this was accidental magic or intentional magic, because the classification has significant legal implications regarding, it was neither," Harry said. Another pause. The note-taker's quill had stopped moving. Everyone in the room was looking at Harry. "What would you call it?" Scrimgeour asked. He'd leaned forward slightly, that measuring quality sharpening into something that looked almost like respect. "Breathing," Harry said again. "Not accidental, I knew it was happening. Not intentional, I wasn't trying to do anything specific. Just existing, taking up the right amount of space." He thought about it. "Has anything ever been classified that way before?" "No," said the note-taker, before catching himself and going red. Then you'll need a new category, Harry said. Marchetti's colleague already made one. Threshold breach, I think. You can use that. Scrimgeour sat back. He looked at Dumbledore, who had been standing quietly by the fireplace in the way that Dumbledore stood when he wanted to be present without influencing the temperature of a room. Scrimgeour looked at Dumbledore for a long moment, and Dumbledore looked back with the polite, interested expression of a man who was not going to rescue anyone. Headmaster, Scrimgeour said. Has there been any formal assessment? Classification of the boys, Harry said. Scrimgeour looked at him. Pardon? My name. You've said, the boy, 3 times. My name is Harry. Scrimgeour blinked. Then, to his credit, something in his expression adjusted, not deference, not apology, more like recalibration. Has there been any formal assessment, Harry, of your magical profile? Professor McGonagall and I have been working on that, Harry said. Do you want to know what we found? Scrimgeour glanced at McGonagall, who was in the doorway with her arms folded and an expression that said, I've been waiting for someone to ask. We do, Scrimgeour said. McGonagall came in, produced a scroll of parchment that was longer than most official ministry documents Harry had seen referenced in the books he'd been reading, and laid it on the low table between the chairs. It was covered in numbers and notations and several small illustrations that had apparently been necessary because the numbers alone weren't sufficient. The short version, McGonagall said, is that the standard magical assessment scale doesn't accommodate him. We used the extended Flamel scale, typically reserved for master-level practitioners, and found that it also doesn't accommodate him. We then used a scale that hasn't been practically necessary since 1612, which was designed to assess theoretical maximum magical output rather than any actual individual, and it, she paused, also didn't accommodate him. Umbridge made a small, strangled sound. What did accommodate him? Scrimgeour asked. We're currently working on that, McGonagall said, in the tone of someone who has accepted a professional challenge and will not be making any promises about the timeline. Harry added, helpfully, she made up a new number. She's calling it G sub infinity for now. McGonagall gave him a look that was not entirely disapproving. I am calling it an undefined upper limit, which is the technically accurate terminology. Same thing, Harry said. The note-taker had given up on his quill and was just staring. Scrimgeour looked at the scroll. He looked at Harry. He looked at the scroll again. He was, Harry thought, a fundamentally pragmatic man, and pragmatic men had a specific way of processing information that was outside their existing framework. They didn't deny it, they filed it under operational fact and started working out implications. Something in his bearing shifted as Harry watched, a long, slow adjustment, like a building settling on new foundations. The ministry, Scrimgeour said carefully, will need some form of ongoing. No, Harry said. Just that. No heat, no drama. Just a single syllable, clean and final. Scrimgeour stopped. I'll speak with the ministry when there's something worth speaking about, Harry said. I'm not a security risk. I don't intend to level any more streets. I'll be going to school in September when I'm old enough, and I'll learn things in an orderly fashion and everyone can go back to their normal categories. He looked at Scrimgeour steadily. But there won't be monitoring, and there won't be ministry representatives assigned to me, and I won't be registered or categorized or put in a system, because those things exist to give people control over things they're worried about, and I understand the worry, but the control part won't work, so we'd all just be pretending, and I don't want to waste anyone's time. A very long silence. Umbridge broke it, because Umbridge always broke silences. That's not, Harry, there are rules, there are protocols, the ministry has a responsibility, to Wizarding Britain, Harry said. Yes. I'm not a threat to Wizarding Britain. I'm 5 years old and I'm eating porridge. He paused. The monitoring thing really won't work. I'd like you to believe me on that so we don't have to demonstrate it. Scrimgeour looked at him for a long, still moment. Then he turned to Dumbledore. Headmaster. Your assessment. "I think," Dumbledore said, from his position by the fireplace, "that Harry has expressed himself with considerable clarity, and that the Ministry would be best served by hearing him." Scrimgeour stood. He straightened his robes. He looked at Harry one more time, and there was something in the look that was not quite the measuring calculation that had been there at the beginning, something that might have been called, by someone feeling charitable, respect. "We'll be in touch," he said. "I look forward to it," Harry said, which was polite and mostly true. They left. The note-taker tripped on the doorstep, recovered, and didn't look back. Umbridge made a sound like someone swallowing something unpleasant for the greater good. Scrimgeour walked to the apparition point with the straight-back stride of a man reorganizing his entire worldview and not letting it show. McGonagall closed the door behind them and stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she came back into the sitting room and looked at Harry with the expression she'd been cultivating since the first morning, part professional assessment, part something more personal that she hadn't decided to acknowledge yet. "Well done," she said. "Though next time, perhaps slightly more diplomatic." "I was diplomatic," Harry said. "You told Under-Secretary Umbridge you could see through her. She could have found that useful." McGonagall made a sound that had no official category and went to find her book. The Gringotts delegation came on Friday, and they were significantly more interesting. Harry heard them before he saw them, not operating, not approaching by road, but arriving through some channel that moved differently, slower and more considered, like something geological shifting. He was in the garden when it happened, practicing a thing he'd been working on with McGonagall that involved moving fire from one place to another without any visible medium, and he stopped practicing when the ground under his feet vibrated once, briefly, and a door appeared in the garden wall that hadn't been there before. Not a Ministry door, not Dumbledore's doing. Just a door, dark wood with iron fittings, standing freestanding in the garden wall with the unself-conscious confidence of something that had always been there and you'd simply forgotten to notice. 3 goblins came through it. Harry had read about goblins. The books had been moderately informative, in the way that books about a culture written by people outside that culture are moderately informative, capturing the facts while missing the texture. The goblins who walked through the door in his garden wall were nothing like the bank teller description he'd read. The one in the lead was tall for a goblin, still short by human standards, but carrying height differently, the way certain short people carry themselves as if height is an arbitrary metric they've chosen not to engage with. He wore dark red robes with silver clasps and moved with the precision of something that had not wasted a motion in several centuries of living. His eyes were gold. Harry registered this with a particular sharpness, because gold was the color behind his eyelids, gold was the color the trees on Privet Drive had turned, gold was the color that meant something very specific in the deep grammar of whatever he was made of. He walked toward the goblins. They stopped walking when he did. The tall one, the leader, looked at him, and Harry looked back, and something happened in that exchange that wasn't quite recognition but was close to it. The way 2 instruments played in the same key will make the air between them do something harmonious without anyone deciding to. "Ignoreth," the goblin said. The word hit Harry between the ribs like a warm fist. His breath caught. It was the first time anyone in his current life had used that name. He didn't know how he knew it was his name, he just knew, the way you know your own heartbeat, the way you know the sound of your name in the dark when someone you trust says it. He stood in the garden of the Wiltshire safe house with grass under his bare feet and his 2 large Dumbledore robes and his round glasses and his scar, and something ancient and enormous turned over behind his eyes like a great will catching its groove. "Yes," Harry said. The goblin bowed. It was not the slightly condescending bow of a shopkeeper to a customer. It was the bow of one equal to another, deep, held, the posture of something that understood the weight of formality because it used formality to mean things. The other 2 goblins bowed as well. Harry bowed back, at exactly the right depth, with exactly the right duration, without knowing how he knew what that was. His body knew. The body remembered things the mind was still catching up on. "My name is Ragnuk," the tall goblin said, straightening. "Director of the Ancient Accounts, Gringotts Bank. These are my colleagues, Gold Tongue and Sharp Vault." He spoke English with the particular precision of someone who has learned it thoroughly enough to choose exactly the right words and is mildly impatient with how few there are. We apologize for the unannounced visit. Gringotts' protocol for circumstances of this nature is direct contact rather than mediated approach. Circumstances of what nature? Harry asked, though he thought he might know. The progenitor seals broke on Monday morning, Ragnarok said simply. Every major vault in Gringotts experienced a resonance event. 3 chambers that have been sealed since the founding of the bank opened of their own accord. He paused. We've been expecting this for a very long time. Goblins have long memories. Longer than most, Harry said. Ragnarok's gold eyes sharpened with what might have been approval. The vaults that open belong to you. Have always belonged to you. The Potter vault you're aware of, presumably, your parents' estate. The 2 deeper vaults are older. The ancient vaults. He said the capitals clearly. They contain things that predate the bank itself. We've been holding them in trust. Harry looked at the garden wall where the door still stood open. Past the goblins, through the door, he couldn't see the lane he knew should be there. He could see something else, just a sense of depth, like the corridor of a place much larger than it appeared. Can I see them? He asked. That is why we're here, Ragnarok said. McGonagall appeared at the cottage door looking like someone who'd heard the word Gringotts and had opinions about proper protocols and chaperones and was preparing to voice them. Harry glanced at her. I'll be back for lunch, he said. She opened her mouth. I'll be fine, he said. And then, because he meant it and because she deserved to hear it clearly, I trust them. She closed her mouth. The particular battle between professional concern and genuine respect for his judgment played itself out across her face in about 3 seconds, and respect won, which was why Harry liked her. He went through the door with the goblins. He'd never been to Gringotts before. He'd read about it, seen the illustration in one of the books, the white marble building, the uniformed goblins, the sense of solidity. But the part of Gringotts he was taken to was not the part in any illustration. They didn't go through the main entrance. The door in the garden wall took them somewhere that seemed to be several floors below the main bank, through a transition that had no intermediate geography, just the garden, then a stone corridor lit with a sourceless amber glow, the smell of earth and metal and age. How does the door work? Harry asked, as they walked. It finds where it needs to be, Goldtongue said, from slightly behind Harry's left shoulder. She had a dry, precise voice. We've had it for 800 years. It has been very reliable. What would it do if I tried to stop it finding? We don't know, Goldtongue said. We've never tried. We're not interested in finding out. They went deeper. The amber light grew warmer. Harry could feel the vaults around him through the stone, not sense their contents exactly, but feel their presence the way you feel rooms in a dark house, by the texture of the air and the slight changes in temperature and the sounds walls make when they're close. Some of the rooms they passed felt empty, sealed, dormant. Some felt like sleeping things. They passed a door that Harry paused at for a half-second, involuntarily, before continuing, felt like a held breath. Something waiting. That one is yours too, Ragnarok said, without breaking stride. In time. The 2 ancient vaults were at the end of a corridor that seemed to get slightly wider as you walked it, an architectural impossibility that Harry decided not to dwell on. The doors were stone, not gold, with no visible locking mechanism. They were warm to the touch when Harry reached out and pressed his palm against the nearer one. They opened inward. What was inside the first vault was not gold. Not jewels. There were some of both. Yes, old enough that the coins had no mint mark Harry could identify and the gems were cut in shapes that no current jeweler would recognize, but these were incidental, background, like change left in a coat pocket. What the vault actually contained was knowledge. Scrolls, thousands of them, in a script that Harry could not read with his eyes but somehow parsed anyway, the meaning arriving in his mind the way music arrives, not translated, just understood. Stone tablets. Objects that weren't quite artifacts, not tools, not ornamental, something in between, objects that existed because someone had needed to make permanent a thought too large for language. Small fires that burned in stone dishes without fuel and had apparently been burning here since the doors first closed, flames that were older than most of the magical traditions currently being taught at Hogwarts. Harry stood in the doorway and looked at all of it and felt the word mine in a way that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with origin. The second vault, Ragnarok said quietly, is more personal. We'll come to it. Harry walked into the first vault slowly. The fires noticed him, he could feel it, each small flame tilting toward him slightly, the way sunflowers track light. He crouched in front of the nearest one and held his hand 6 inches above the flame. It reached for his palm. He let it touch him. It was like remembering. Dense, rapid, layered, images and sensations and something that was almost language, a report from something very old addressed to him specifically, a message that had been waiting in this flame for longer than the building above it had existed. He couldn't process it all at once. He understood, in that moment, that he wouldn't process it all for years. Maybe decades. The flame had patience. It had been patient for millennia already. This was my library, Harry said, and his voice came out different, slightly deeper, resonant in a way that made the room itself vibrate sympathetically. He heard it and adjusted, brought it back to the voice of a 5-year-old boy, which required a specific effort that was becoming more familiar with practice. It was, Ragnarok said. And the scrolls, these are, records. History. Things you wrote down. Ragnarok paused. Or had written down. We were never entirely clear on the distinction, from our ancestors' accounts. Harry stood. He looked at the ceiling of the vault, which was higher than the ceiling of the corridor outside, much higher, impossibly high, and understood that the physical geometry of this space was operating under a different set of rules than the world above it. You've been protecting all of this. It is our purpose, Ragnarok said simply. And the other vault? Ready when you are. He was. They walked back to the corridor and to the second door. This one opened before Harry touched it, recognized his approach and moved, which the goblins responded to with the controlled composure of people who'd been told this might happen and had prepared themselves and were now finding the preparation still slightly insufficient. Inside the second vault was a single object. It was a scale. One scale, roughly the size of Harry's palm, not from a balance or a measuring instrument but an actual scale, a body scale, a thing shed naturally, lying in the center of an empty stone floor with no plinth, no display case, no protection beyond its own qualities. It had no color that Harry could name, it shifted as you looked at it, cycling through amber and gold and deep red and the particular color of the inside of a flame when it's burning absolutely cleanly. Harry crossed the vault and picked it up. The world didn't shake. No lights blazed. Nothing dramatic happened. He picked it up and it sat in his hand, warm, weightless, and the thing behind his sternum, the thing that had been building pressure in the cupboard, the thing that had exhaled on Privet Drive, the thing that turned the sky amber and the trees gold, recognized it. Breathed out toward it, soft and long, like finally finding the other half of something. What is it? He asked. You left it here, Ragnarok said. A long time before the current age. Our records don't say why. A reminder, Harry said, understanding arriving fully formed. In case I came back and needed to find myself faster. He looked at it, the cycling colors, the weightlessness. I left it for me. That was our conclusion as well, Ragnarok said. He sounded pleased, in the way goblins express pleasure, a slight warming of the voice, a quality of vindication. Our founders believed you would return eventually. There were debates, across the centuries, about whether eventually meant what we hoped it meant. The younger generations began to doubt. He glanced at his colleagues. Not all of us did. Thank you, Harry said. He meant all of it, the waiting, the keeping, the gold eyes and the door that found where it needed to be. He put the scale in his pocket. It weighed nothing but he could feel it there, a warmth against his hip. Thank you for keeping it. Ragnuk bowed again. The vaults remain yours. You may access them whenever you choose. We'll establish a formal access protocol, if you're comfortable with that. I am. And Ragnuk, Harry paused, thought about it. The Potter's Vault. My parents' money. I'd like to understand what's in it properly. We can arrange a full account review. I want to provide for the Dursleys as well, Harry said. Ragnuk's expression shifted. Not generously. Reasonably. They did, he picked his words carefully, what they were able to do. Which wasn't much. But I don't want them struggling. Ragnuk was quiet for a moment. You are more patient than the record suggested. The records are from a long time ago, Harry said. I've had some time to think. The Hogwarts letter arrived at 8:30 on a Thursday morning, approximately 3 weeks ahead of any schedule it had any business arriving on. It didn't come by owl. It simply materialized on the kitchen table, between Harry's toast and his cup of tea. Harry had discovered tea was excellent and had formed a serious opinion about it within his first week at the cottage, without any visible transition, as if it had been there all along and had only just decided to be noticed. The envelope was addressed in the usual self-writing green ink, but the writing itself looked slightly different from the standard template, more deliberate, more careful, like a hand that was doing something it didn't normally do and was taking it seriously. The address read, Mr. H. Potter, the armchair by the window, the Wiltshire safe house which he has made considerably warmer than regulation. McGonagall saw this last line and made a sound. Harry opened the envelope. He read the letter. He turned it over in case there was more on the back. There wasn't. It says I've been admitted, he said. McGonagall came and looked over his shoulder. It says you've been, yes. Yes, it does. She took the letter and read it more carefully, with the expression of someone checking that the words mean what they appear to mean. This is a formal admissions letter. For September start. She looked at the envelope again. It came 3 weeks early. Hogwarts has sentience, Harry said. He'd read about this. She sends the letters herself. That is a simplified characterization of a very complex, she knows, Harry said. About me. She sent it early because she wanted me to know she knows. He considered. That's nice, actually. McGonagall sat down. She set the letter on the table. She looked at it for a moment. Harry. You're 5 years old. Nearly 6. You are 5 years old, and Hogwarts has sent you an early admissions letter, and you've received a Gringotts delegation that included the Director of Ancient Accounts, and you've told the Ministry where they can put their monitoring proposal, and, she stopped. Gathered herself. I want to make sure. Are you all right? With all of this? Harry ate a piece of toast. He thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved, because McGonagall deserved that. I feel like someone who's been asleep for a long time, he said. And they've woken up in a small room, but the room keeps getting bigger. He paused. It's good. The getting bigger part is good. The small room part, he touched the scar on his forehead, briefly, an unconscious gesture. I think I was angry for a while, in the cupboard. I didn't know it was anger. But it was. At the Dursleys? At the smallness. He put down the toast. The Dursleys were just the shape the smallness took. They didn't make me small. They just agreed with the smallness. Like they thought it was supposed to be there. He looked at the letter. I'm not small. No, McGonagall said, and her voice had something in it that wasn't professional distance anymore. You are absolutely not small. He picked up the letter again. Near the bottom, below the standard admissions text, below the list of required equipment and the notice about the Hogwarts Express, there was a single additional line that hadn't been there in any edition of the standard letter he'd seen reproduced in any book. He read it twice. What does it say? McGonagall asked. Harry looked up. He had an expression she'd been learning to read over the past few weeks, a particular quality of quiet that meant something had struck him more deeply than he was going to explain immediately, if ever. It says, he read it aloud, the castle has been waiting. She hopes the wait was not too unkind. McGonagall was very still. Do you think that's the castle, Harry asked, or the headmaster? I think, McGonagall said, after a moment, that in this particular case, it may be both. Harry folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket, next to the scale that weighed nothing and cycled through the colors of old fire. He picked up his tea. The fire in the kitchen grate burned warm and orange and aware, and outside the cottage windows the forest moved in a light wind, and above the cottage somewhere up in the blue, 2 owls that had been circling the property since Monday turned slow, patient circles in the morning air. He had 4 years until September. 4 years in a getting bigger room, learning the shape of what he was, working out how to be this size in this world, this time, in this particular body with its scar and its glasses and its capacity for genuine enjoyment of a good cup of tea. He was already looking forward to it. He was already looking forward to Hogwarts, which had waited for him and said so, and which was a castle, and he had always liked things that were old and honest and built to last. He drank his tea. McGonagall went to find a different book. Somewhere below the floor of the cottage, very faintly, the earth was warm. 4 years passed. Not quickly, that's the wrong word for time that's spent doing things properly. But purposefully. McGonagall stayed for the first year, and by the end of it had written a paper that she submitted to no journal and showed to no one except Dumbledore, titled, Observed Magical Characteristics of Undefined Upper Limit Practitioners, a case study, which Dumbledore read twice, made careful notes in the margins of, and filed in a drawer that required 3 separate passwords to open. Ragnarok came twice a year. Harry made his way through the first vault scrolls slowly, there was no rushing it, no summarizing, the knowledge arrived at the pace it arrived and demanded to be processed fully before more could be absorbed. By age 7 he'd understood more about the deeper history of magic than any living wizard. By age 8 he'd started to understand things that living wizards had never known, things that predated the current understanding of what magic was by enough centuries to make the current understanding feel like a first draft. He was not a prodigy in the way people use that word, a child excelling at adult material. He was something more like an adult in recovery, relearning a native language through a new body, finding that the body was remarkably good at it once given proper resources. He stayed curious. This was, he thought, the most important thing. The thing that made the vast ancientness of what he was inside livable in a small, modern, human frame. He was genuinely curious about the modern world, the small world, the world of train times and owl post and the particular English passion for weather as a conversation topic. He liked it. He liked Wiltshire mornings and he liked the specific quality of autumn light on old stone and he liked tea. He was very serious about tea by the time he was 8. He talked with Dumbledore regularly. They had established something that was not quite a friendship, too asymmetrical for that, too many things unsaid on both sides, too much history on one side and too much future on the other, but was honest in a way that Harry valued. Dumbledore told him the truth when pressed and worked around it when not pressed, which was at least a consistent policy that Harry respected as a policy even when it frustrated him in practice. He told Dumbledore about Voldemort on a Tuesday afternoon when Harry was 8 and they were having their monthly meeting in the sitting room of the cottage, and specifically about the quality of presence he sometimes felt when his scar ached, not pain, more like a knock on a door from the wrong side of it, an awareness of something that should not be aware of him pressing against the boundary of his consciousness and finding the boundary significantly more solid than anticipated. Dumbledore became very still in his chair. "How long?" he asked. "Since I was 6, Harry said. "It bothered me at first. It's less bother now." He thought about how to explain it. "It's like having a radio tuned to a station you don't want. Eventually you learn to hear it without listening. And can he sense you?" "He senses something," Harry said. "I don't think he knows what. I can feel him trying to work it out. He's intelligent, very." He paused. "Also very frightened." Under everything. He's the most frightened thing I've encountered since I woke up. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. He is a man who chose to make himself afraid of one specific thing, he said, and then spent his life building that fear into an architecture sophisticated enough to feel like philosophy. Harry looked at him. You sound like you feel sorry for him. I do, Dumbledore said. And I am also enormously wary of him. Both things have been true for 40 years. He paused. How do you feel about him? Interested, Harry said honestly. He killed my parents. He tried to kill me, which didn't work the way he expected, for reasons he doesn't understand. He's out there right now, in some form, waiting. He looked at the fire. I'd like to have a conversation with him eventually. A conversation, Dumbledore repeated. I think he needs one, Harry said. A real one. Not a battle. He paused. Though I suspect he'll insist on it being a battle first. Dumbledore looked at the fire too. After a moment, very quietly, he said, I have been trying to plan around you, Harry. Since Privet Drive. Working out how to position you, how to guide events toward a certain conclusion. And I'm beginning to understand that, he paused, choosing his words with the care of a man who rarely needed to, that I've been operating as if you were a piece on a board I was managing. And that is both incorrect and rather insulting, and I apologize for it. Harry looked at him. I know you've been doing it. I suspected you did. I didn't mind, much. You're trying to protect people. That's a good reason. He shifted in his armchair, his chair, still, the fire still new, and straightened his glasses, which he didn't need for his eyesight but had kept because they were a habit and because they made people slightly more comfortable, which he discovered was occasionally useful. You can tell me the whole plan, you know. I can handle it. It's not that simple. Most things are simpler than people decide they need to be. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. He has to die. Properly this time. The Horcruxes have to go first. You know where some of them are. I can find the others. He paused. I know about the one in my scar, by the way. I've been keeping it contained but we should discuss it properly. Dumbledore had gone completely still. I know, Harry said again, gently. You were going to tell me eventually. You were building up to it. He didn't say it was taking a while. He didn't need to. I'm not angry. I understand why you were careful about it. He looked at the scar on his wrist, left behind by the Dursley's cupboard latch, a mundane scar next to the magical one, equally healed now. The piece of his soul in my scar, it's very small, and it's very uncomfortable, and it's been trying to influence me since I was old enough to have thoughts to influence, and it has had absolutely no success whatsoever, in case you were worried. I was worried, Dumbledore said. His voice was slightly different. Harry, I'm sorry. For all of it. The cupboard. The plan I had that didn't, ask me what I want to do about Hogwarts, Harry said. A pause. Dumbledore asked, what do you want to do about Hogwarts? Harry smiled. He had a good smile, genuine, warm, something that reached his eyes and made the amber in them more visible. I want to go, he said. I want to go and do it the normal way. Classes, homework, exams. He paused. Friends, hopefully. I'd like friends. I think, Dumbledore said, recovering himself fully, that Hogwarts will provide. Good. Harry looked at the letter in his pocket, worn soft from carrying. September, then. Outside the cottage, September was 10 months away and the Wiltshire forest was doing something spectacular in the late afternoon light, the way forests do when autumn arrives and they decide to be dramatic about it, all copper and rust and the particular gold that Harry had known since the inside of his eyelids. He watched it through the window. The fire in the grate breathed steadily, in and out, in and out. 10 months until Hogwarts. Until the world got bigger again. He was, genuinely, looking forward to it. Chapter 3, Diagon Alley, or Everything That Bows. The morning Harry went to Diagon Alley. It rained in London the way London rains when it's serious about it, not the dramatic storm rain of fiction but the steady, grey, committed kind that makes the city look like it's being slowly developed in a darkroom. He stood outside the leaky cauldron in his new Hogwarts robes, deep blue, a shade that McGonagall had selected with the particular care of someone who understood that first impressions in the wizarding world were going to be complicated enough without adding the wrong color, and looked at the unremarkable pub front with his hands in his pockets and the scale from the ancient vault warm against his hip. Dumbledore was not with him. This had been Harry's specific request, made 3 weeks before and received by Dumbledore with a look that travelled from instinctive objection through professional assessment and arrived at genuine respect in approximately 4 seconds. "I'll go with Hagrid," Harry had said. The way it was supposed to happen. And Dumbledore had nodded, and that had been that. Hagrid was standing next to him, umbrella up, enormous, radiating the particular quality of barely contained enthusiasm that Harry had come to find deeply endearing in the 6 weeks since they'd met. Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts, was a man who felt things at full volume and saw no reason to turn it down, and Harry, who had spent 5 years in a cupboard being made to feel that his existence was inconvenient, found the full volume quality of Hagrid's feelings about Harry's existence enormously good for the soul. Right then, Hagrid said, looking at the leaky cauldron with an expression of pure excitement, barely wearing a professional mask. "Ready?" "Yes," Harry said. Well, you'll see. First time in Diagon Alley, Harry, Hagrid made a gesture with his free hand that covered approximately the entire range of positive human experience. "You'll see. I've read about it." "Reading's not the same," Hagrid said firmly. "Not even close." He was right. They went through the pub. Tom the barman, ancient and toothless, looked up when they came in and his eyes went immediately to Harry, widened, and then he came around the bar faster than his age suggested he should be able to move and shook Harry's hand with both of his, and said something about it being an honor, and Harry thanked him and shook his hand back, because manners were a thing he decided to maintain on principle, and then they went through to the back courtyard. Hagrid tapped the bricks. The wall opened. Harry stepped through. He'd read about it. He'd read careful, thorough descriptions from several sources, including one very detailed account by a wizard historian who'd clearly loved the place. None of it had been sufficient preparation for the sound of it, the layered noise of a place that had been continuously busy for centuries, voices and footsteps and the occasional bang or flash of magic from some shop or another, all of it under the steady grey sky, the cobblestones wet and gleaming, the crooked buildings leaning over the street like interested gossips, and above everything the particular quality of magical ambient energy that Harry's senses registered as a warmth and a hum. A low-grade electricity that meant things are being done here, continuously, with intention and craft. He stood at the entrance to the alley and breathed it in. "Well?" Hagrid said. "You were right," Harry said. "Reading isn't the same." Hagrid beamed. They went to Gringotts first. Harry had been to the underground vaults, but never to the main bank, and the experience of coming in through the front doors was different from the experience of the Goblin Door in the Wiltshire Garden, more formal, more theatrical, more designed to impress. The white marble, the tall ceilings, the rows of goblins at their counters, the sense of accumulated wealth and the weight of institutional permanence. He came through the doors and several things happened in quick succession. The nearest goblin teller looked up. His eyes went to Harry. Something passed across his face that was not quite the expression goblins showed to ordinary customers, not obsequious, not dismissive, something that was quickly controlled but had been, for a moment, unmistakably something closer to reverence. He said something in gobbledygook to the goblin next to him. That goblin looked up. Said something to the next one. It moved down the row of tellers like a ripple, heads turning, the subtle shift of posture that happens in a room when it collectively registers that something significant has entered it. Harry walked to the nearest open counter. The goblin there, young, sharp-faced, with the gold eyes that Harry had only seen in Ragnarok before, straightened in a way that was not the standard straightening for a customer. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said. Hello, Harry said. We're here to visit the Potter Vault. I also wanted to let you know I'll be in touch with Director Ragnak about the quarterly review of the ancient accounts. The goblin blinked once. Then, very smoothly, he said, of course. I'll arrange a cart immediately. And I'll inform the director of your visit. A pause. Welcome to Gringotts, Mr. Potter. It is, we are glad to have you here. Hagrid, standing just behind Harry's left shoulder, was watching all of this with an expression caught somewhere between confusion and awe. The confusion was about the goblin's tone. The awe was about something he couldn't quite articulate, the sense that the room had subtly reorganized itself around the 9-year-old in front of him, like a compass finding north. The cart ride was Harry's second time on one. He gripped the front rail and felt the deep cold air of the tunnels, the dark and the speed, and the faint warm response of the vault levels as they went deeper. The Potter Vault was in the upper levels, moderately deep, nothing like the ancient accounts, and the cart stopped with the characteristic lurch and the goblin who accompanied them unlocked the door. Gold. A lot of it. Enough that even having read about it, even knowing it was there, the visual reality of it was briefly stunning, galleons stacked to the ceiling in some places, jewels in open chests, the accumulated wealth of multiple generations of a family that had been wealthy for a long time. Harry looked at it without the particular kind of excitement the sight seemed designed to produce. He picked up a handful of galleons, the solid weight of them, the way they caught the vault light. Take what you need, Hagrid said, in the tone of someone who'd said it in his head with significantly more drama and was finding the actual delivery anticlimactic because the recipient was not reacting the way he'd imagined. I know, Harry said. He loaded the money bag with the practical efficiency of someone who'd done sums about what Hogwarts equipment actually cost and prepared accordingly. He wasn't lavish about it. He wasn't miserly. He was precise. Going back up in the cart, Harry said, Hagrid. My parents. Yeah, Hagrid said, voice dropping to the particular register it took when something mattered. Did you know them well? Well as I could. Your mum, Hagrid's voice did something complicated. Your mum was brilliant, Harry. Kind of brilliant that doesn't make you feel stupid, you know. Like she was sharing it with you. And your dad, he made a sound somewhere between a laugh and something sadder. Trouble. In the good way. Always in the good way. Harry looked at the passing dark of the tunnel walls. I think about them, he said. Sometimes I think about whether they'd have liked me. Harry, Hagrid said, with absolute conviction, they'd have been mad about you. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, thank you, Hagrid. It's just the truth. The cart came up into the light. They went to Madame Malkin's for robes first, because Hagrid had a list and an order of operations and intended to follow it. Harry came into the shop and Madame Malkin, a small, motherly witch who moved through her shop with the efficient grace of someone who'd been fitting robes onto humans of every imaginable shape for decades, smiled at him, guided him to a stool, began the measuring process. And stopped. She was standing behind him with a tape measure that had been noting down numbers independently, and it had stopped moving too, hovering in the air, and she was looking at Harry in the mirror with the particular expression that he'd been encountering with increasing frequency, the one that said I don't know exactly what you are but my instincts have strong feelings about it. Hogwarts, she said, finding her professional footing. Yes, Harry said. First year. Yes. She resumed the measurements with a slight overcorrection toward brisk cheerfulness, which Harry found charming. The shop was otherwise occupied at the far end by another student being fitted, a boy about Harry's age, pale and blonde, with robes that were clearly already expensive and a quality of self-possession that sat on him like something practiced and inherited in equal measure. He caught Harry's eye in the mirror and said, with the ease of someone for whom initiating conversations was as natural as breathing, Hogwarts as well. Yes, Harry said. First year. Yes. The blonde boy nodded, satisfied. Draco Malfoy. He said the name the way certain people say their names, not arrogantly, exactly, more like offering a known quantity, presenting credentials. He was watching Harry in the mirror with eyes that were doing more active assessment than the politely curious expression on his face suggested. "Harry Potter," Harry said. The active assessment in Draco's eyes did something. It was brief but visible, a flicker of surprise overridden immediately by control, and then something more interesting, recalibration. He'd had an expectation, Harry could see, and the reality in front of him was doing something the expectation hadn't accounted for. Harry looked back at him calmly. He was used to people who expected things. "I've heard about you," Draco said. "I'd imagine," Harry said. "The boy who lived. That's what they call me. What would you call yourself?" Harry considered. "Harry," he said. "Mostly." Something shifted in Draco's expression, not softened, but adjusted, like a lens coming into better focus. He was quiet for a moment, which Harry suspected was not his natural setting. "My father says you're going to be important," Draco said. "Important in the wizarding world. That the right people should make sure to." He stopped. Harry watched him process whatever script he'd been handed versus the person in front of him who clearly didn't require that particular script. "He gave me a lot of advice about meeting you." "What advice?" Harry asked. Draco looked at him. A genuine look, not the calculated one from before. "He said to make a good impression." "How's that going?" A pause. Then, to Harry's genuine pleasure, Draco Malfoy laughed, a short, surprised sound, real and unpolished in a way that his careful exterior clearly hadn't intended to allow. "Unclear," he said. "I'll report back." "What house are you expecting?" Harry asked. "Slytherin. It's been Malfoy's for generations." Said without the boastfulness it might have had, more like stating a fact, with the slightly complicated expression of someone who has inherited a tradition they haven't decided yet whether to be proud of or merely accept. "You?" "I don't know yet." Draco looked at him. "Surely you have preferences." "I prefer honest people," Harry said. "And people who are what they say they are. The rest is details." Draco absorbed this. His expression was doing something Harry recognized, the particular work of a quick mind encountering a reference point that doesn't fit the existing map and deciding to update the map rather than ignore the reference point. It was, Harry thought, the most promising thing he'd seen in the boy's face. "I'll see you at Hogwarts, then," Draco said, as Madame Malkin declared him done and began gathering his completed robes. "You will," Harry said. Draco left the shop. At the door he paused and looked back, just briefly, with an expression that was more complicated and more genuine than anything he'd worn while they were talking, and then he was gone into the rainy alley. Madame Malkin finished Harry's measurements in thoughtful silence, then said, as if she'd been saving it, "He's a good boy, underneath. His father's training sits heavy on him." "I noticed," Harry said. "He'll be fine." She looked at him. "You sound certain." "I am," Harry said. He wasn't sure how he was certain. He just was. Books, cauldrons, scales, telescope, they moved through the alley with Hagrid's list and Harry's careful attention, and at each shop Harry made note of what the shopkeepers did when he came in, building a picture of how the wizarding world was going to receive him. It was a mixed picture. Many people looked at his scar. Some people looked at his face. A handful looked at something else entirely, something that wasn't visible but that they seemed to sense, and those were the ones who reacted differently, who went quiet, or who subtly straightened, or who after Harry left leaned over to the person next to them and said something in a low voice. He bought his telescope from an old wizard who barely spoke, just wrapped it carefully and handed it over with both hands and nodded once, gravely, like passing something important to someone who'd understand its value. He bought his cauldron from a broad witch who talked non-stop and didn't react to him any differently than she reacted to anyone else, which Harry found genuinely refreshing. Flourish and Blots was the one he'd been looking forward to. The shop was narrow and deep, shelved from floor to ceiling, with a slightly chaotic quality that suggested the books had been doing some rearranging of their own. Harry came in and stood for a moment in the doorway just breathing the smell of it, old paper and ink and something that might have been the accumulated intellectual energy of 10,000 books sharing a relatively small space for decades. He was moving toward the Hogwarts curriculum section when he almost walked into a girl coming from the opposite direction at speed, her arms already full of 3 books she'd apparently decided were non-negotiable, her eyes on the title of a 4th she was holding up at arm's length to read the spine. She stopped short. He stopped short. Her books didn't fall, because she had a practiced book-carrying grip that suggested this was not her first high-velocity literary near-collision. She was dark-haired, slightly older looking than him despite apparently being around the same age, with the expression of someone currently engaged in a vivid internal argument about how many books could fit in a standard Hogwarts trunk if organized efficiently. "Sorry," she said immediately, looking up from the book. "I wasn't, sorry, I should have been watching." She stopped. She looked at his face, his scar, and the same flicker of recognition crossed her features that he saw everywhere, but in her case it was immediately followed by something more interesting, a pulling back of the initial response, a visible act of self-correction, an expression that said I will not be the person who stares at the scar. "It's fine," Harry said. "I was reading while walking," she said. "It's a habit. My mother says I'll walk into traffic one day." She looked at the book she was still holding up. "It's about the theory of elemental magic classification. For something that's supposed to be introductory it's incredibly dense." She looked at the Hogwarts crest on his robes. "You're going to Hogwarts?" "First year," Harry said. "Me too." She shifted her book stack and stuck out the hand that was suddenly free. "Hermione Granger." "Harry Potter." She shook his hand firmly. No flicker at the name, or rather, a flicker, but controlled, absorbed, filed. He watched her file it. It was impressive. Most people, when they heard his name for the first time in person, went through a visible processing period. Hermione Granger processed on the go, without breaking conversational stride. "I've read about you," she said, in a tone that was entirely factual rather than awestruck. "The books aren't consistent, actually. The historical accounts differ quite significantly on the details of what happened that night in Godric's Hollow, and some of them contradict each other on fairly fundamental." She stopped herself. "Sorry. I do that." "What?" "Immediately go to the problems with sources. My parents say it's antisocial." "It's interesting," Harry said, and meant it. "Which parts contradict each other?" Her eyes lit up in the specific way that happens when you say the exact right thing to someone who'd resigned themselves to saying the not quite right thing. "The energy discharge descriptions, mostly. Some of the accounts describe it as a standard magical rebound, the killing curse reflecting because of Lily Potter's sacrificial magic, which is the accepted explanation. But the magnitude of the ambient reading data that the Ministry's monitoring system recorded that night is." She paused. "I was reading the Ministry's released data as a comparison source for a paper I was." She paused again. "I do a lot of independent research. Anyway. The magnitude is inconsistent with a simple rebound event. The numbers suggest something much larger was involved." Harry looked at her. She had the particular quality of a mind that was genuinely first-rate, not the showy speed of someone who'd been called clever their whole life and had learned to perform cleverness, but the quieter, deeper quality of someone who was actually trying to understand things, who found the gaps in the accepted explanation more interesting than the explanation itself. "You should keep looking into it," Harry said. "Do you know what actually happened?" He tilted his head. "I have some theories." "Would you?" She stopped herself. "Recalibrated. You don't have to tell me. It's your history." That was intrusive. "It wasn't," he said. "We can talk about it. Just not in a bookshop." He glanced at the books in her arms. "How many of those are on the required list?" She looked at them. "One," she admitted. "The others are supplementary." "Good supplementary or anxious supplementary?" A pause. Something in her expression shifted, the professional facade of the extremely prepared student dropping for a moment, replaced by something more honest. "A bit of both," she said. This is my first time around other magical children. I went to a Muggle primary. I want to, she stopped. Started again. I want to be ready. You'll be more than ready, Harry said. He said it the way he said true things, simply, without decoration, without the particular tone people use when they're trying to be reassuring. You're already thinking about the gaps in the official explanation for a major magical event. You'll be fine. She looked at him for a moment. Then, very quietly, people don't usually say things like that. Like what? Like they actually mean them. I only say things I mean, Harry said. It saves time. She almost smiled. It was a good almost smile, the kind with the real thing right behind it, just being careful. I'll see you at Hogwarts, then. You will, Harry said. She went back to the stacks with her books and her supplementary research and her excellent mind, and Harry found the curriculum section and collected his required texts and one additional book that had caught his eye, a very old volume on the history of magical creatures, predating the current classification system, written by someone who had clearly spent time with the creatures in question rather than simply cataloging them from a safe distance. He read the first 3 pages in the aisle and bought it without deliberation. Hagrid was waiting for him at the front of the shop, and Harry came out with his books and found Hagrid talking to a boy who looked like he'd been briefly sat on by the world and had decided to accept this as his general condition. Stocky, round-faced, with robes that were slightly too big and the air of someone for whom new beginnings were trying hard to feel like new beginnings and mostly feeling like the old ones reshuffled. The boy saw Harry and the round face did something complicated, nervous recognition, the attempt to look like he wasn't having nervous recognition. Harry, Hagrid said. This is Neville. Neville Longbottom. His gran is over, Hagrid gestured vaguely down the alley, she'll be back in a moment. Hi, Neville said. His voice was slightly too loud for the distance between them, the overcorrection of someone who'd been told to speak up and hadn't quite calibrated the adjustment. Sorry, that was, I know who you are, obviously. I mean, he stopped. He looked mortified. It's fine, Harry said. He meant it. There was something about Neville's complete failure to be smooth that Harry found immediately decent, in the way that conspicuous honesty is decent even when it's awkward. Are you going to Hogwarts? Yes. First year. Neville straightened slightly. I'm a late developer, magically speaking. My family was worried for a while that I might be a squib, but he stopped again. Sorry. You don't need my whole history. I don't mind histories, Harry said. Neville looked at him. A careful look, the look of someone testing whether this is safe to take at face value. My parents are Frank and Alice Longbottom, he said, the way you say something that you know has weight and are watching to see how it lands. They were Aurors. They were tortured. By Bellatrix Lestrange and others. They're in St. Mungo's now. They've been there since I was a baby. Harry held his gaze steadily. I'm sorry, he said. That's a hard thing to carry. Neville blinked. He'd clearly expected something different, pity, or the particular careful silence that adults produced when they didn't know what to say but felt they should look like they were saying something. Not this direct, quiet acknowledgement that didn't make a performance of sympathy. It is, Neville said. Yeah. He looked at his shoes for a moment, then back up. The reason I'm telling you is, people compare us, sometimes. Your parents, my parents. What Voldemort's lot did. I wanted to, he paused. Thought about it. I wanted to say it myself before someone else said it in front of both of us. Seemed better. Harry looked at Neville Longbottom with genuine attention. The round face, the 2 big robes, the voice that had overcorrected upward. The basic, fundamental decency of wanting to own a hard truth rather than have it managed around him. That was well done, Harry said. Neville blinked again. What? Saying it yourself. That was well done. A pause. Then Neville's face did something that wasn't quite the almost smile that Hermione had produced, but was related, a kind of cautious opening, like a window being tried after a long winter. "Oh," he said. "Thanks. I'll see you at Hogwarts," Harry said. "Yeah." And then, with a slightly surprised quality, like someone finding something in a pocket they didn't remember putting there, "I'm looking forward to it, actually." Harry found he was smiling. It felt easy, the natural product of 3 encounters in one afternoon, 3 people who were each interesting in entirely different ways, each of them carrying things and doing their best with what they had. He hadn't expected the best parts of today to be the people. He'd always been looking forward to Hogwarts. Now he was looking forward to it for specific reasons. The wand shop was last. Ollivanders occupied a narrow slot at the end of a row of shops, the kind of presence that made you feel like it had been there before the other shops and would be there after. The peeling gold letters, the single wand on a faded cushion in the window. Harry stood in front of it for a moment before going in, feeling something from inside the shop that was different from the ambient magical energy of the alley, more particular, more precise, the sensation of an enormous number of individually distinct things concentrated in a small space, each one its own resonant note. The bell above the door made its sound. The shop was dim and deep and smelled of wood shavings and something older, something that lived in the grain of very old wood and accumulated over centuries. No one was at the counter. "Mr. Potter." The voice came from somewhere in the shelves, not in a hiding way, just in the way of someone who'd been working and had heard the bell. Ollivander materialized from between 2 towers of narrow boxes, pale-eyed, moving with the careful precise manner of someone who handled delicate things all day and had internalized that precision completely. He looked at Harry. His pale eyes were extraordinary, not in the way of someone performing mysteriousness, but in the way of someone who had been doing one thing with extraordinary focus for most of a very long life and whose eyes showed the accumulated weight of that attention. He looked at Harry's face, his scar, his glasses, his hands. Then he looked at something else. Something behind or beneath or around all of those things. His expression changed. "I wondered," he said, very quietly, "when I would see you in here." "Did you expect me?" Harry asked. "I expected something," Ollivander said. He moved to his counter with the unhurried precision of a man who would not be rushed by anything the universe had to offer. "The wand chooses the wizard. Every wand maker knows this. But the statement assumes, as its premise, that the thing being fitted is a wizard." He looked at Harry with those pale eyes. "And so we find ourselves in interesting territory." "What territory is that?" Harry asked. "Territory that requires a different process," Ollivander said simply. He moved along the counter, trailing one finger along the surface in a gesture that was clearly thoughtful rather than habitual. "May I see your hands?" Harry held them out. Ollivander looked at them for a long moment without touching them. The air in the shop was doing something subtle, that concentrated field of individual resonances shifting, quieting, the way a room of instruments goes quiet before a note is played, each one waiting to respond. "Hold out your wand hand," Ollivander said. Harry held out his right. Ollivander took a wand from the nearest shelf, not reaching for it specifically, just letting his hand find one, the same natural selection that Harry suspected was a trained response to something more intuitive than it appeared. He held it out handle first. Harry took it. The wand cracked along its length from handle to tip, cleanly, without drama. Not an explosion. Not a discharge of energy. Just a quiet, definitive refusal, the way a door closes when you realize you've tried the wrong one. Ollivander looked at the 2 halves in Harry's hand. He took them back. He set them aside. He went to the shelves. He came back with another. That one warped, bent visibly in Harry's grip, a slow curl like something pulled by a tide, until it was no longer a functional shape. Harry returned it without comment. The third one sang. A high, thin sound, beautiful and escalating, that Ollivander stopped by taking it back quickly with the practiced motion of someone who'd witnessed dramatic wand rejection before and knew how to get ahead of the finale. Right, Ollivander said. He stood for a moment in the middle of his shop in the dim light, and Harry watched him thinking, watched the pale eyes go inward, watched a man who'd fitted wands to more witches and wizards than he could probably count work through an entirely new variable. Tell me, he said. What does the shop feel like, to you? Like a conversation, Harry said. All the wands talking at once. Different voices. And is there one voice that's clearer than the others? Harry stood still. He'd been aware of it since he'd come in, not one voice exactly but one direction, the way a sound carries further and clearer through certain materials than others. He turned slightly toward it, followed it along the left wall, deep into the shelves. There, he said. Ollivander went there. He spent a long moment in the shelves, his back to Harry. When he came back, he was holding a box that was different from the others, older, darker, the wood of the box itself a deep color that had taken a long time to get that way. He opened it with the particular care of someone handling something they'd been keeping for a very long time without being entirely sure why. Inside was a wand that looked simple at first, dark wood, unornamented, shorter than some, with a grip that had worn to a slight smoothness that meant either great age or great use or both. But looking at it directly made something behind Harry's eyes respond, the amber gold quality that lived there, the warmth that came when the world touched something real. Holly and phoenix feather, Ollivander said. He was watching Harry's face. 11 inches. Supple. He paused. And something else. Something that was added to the core a very long time ago, by someone who had access to a second material that no currently existing magical tradition has a proper name for. He held the box out. I inherited this wand with the shop. My father's notation on the box says only, for when the owner returns. He received it from his father. Who received it from his father? He looked at Harry steadily. 5 generations of Ollivanders, Mr. Potter, keeping a wand for an owner who had apparently already paid for it. Harry looked at the wand. How old is it? We stopped counting, Ollivander said. At some point the number becomes less informative than the fact. Harry reached into the box and picked it up. The shop went completely still. Not dramatically, not the theatrical stillness of something building to a climax. Just the deep, natural stillness of something that has resolved. The 1,000 individual voices of the wands in their boxes on their shelves settled together, briefly, into a single chord, not a sound, exactly, more a quality of the air, harmonic and complete, and then it was gone, and the shop was just a shop again, and Harry was holding a wand that fit his hand with the simple, unassuming rightness of a thing that had never been for anyone else. He held it at rest, by his side. He didn't make anything happen. He didn't need to demonstrate. The wand and he had already come to an agreement, quiet and mutual and very old. What's the other material? Harry asked. In the core. Ollivander looked at him for a long moment. The notation doesn't say specifically. My grandfather added a note of his own, a guess, he called it, though he was not a guessing man, that read, perhaps something of itself. He tilted his head slightly. I believe he meant the donor of the material wasn't a separate creature but the wand's eventual owner, in some prior form. Harry turned the wand once in his hand. That sounds right, he said. Yes, Ollivander said quietly. It rather does. How much? Ollivander blinked, the transaction apparently requiring a moment's mental adjustment from the territory they'd been in. 7 galleons. The standard price. That seems low, Harry said, for 5 generations of keeping. The keeping was its own reward, Ollivander said, with the simple dignity of a man who means what he says. Harry paid 7 galleons and took the wand. Outside in the alley, the rain had stopped. The wet cobblestones caught the late afternoon light and turned it into something almost gold, the kind of trick that good stone and good light do together when the conditions are right. Hagrid was waiting outside with Harry's bags and packages and the particular misty expression of someone who'd been having a lot of feelings about the day and had decided to let them be feelings without making them into speeches. Harry came out of the shop. The wand was in his sleeve, he'd felt it settle there, the way something finds the right position. He stood in the wet gold light of the alley for a moment. "All right?" Hagrid asked. "Yes," Harry said. He looked down the alley, both ways, the way you look at something you want to properly see before leaving it. The shops, the people, the energy of the place, all of it moving and alive and old and new at once, and somewhere at the far end Hermione Granger was probably still in Flourish and Blots having a serious argument with herself about a fifth book, and Neville Longbottom was with his grandmother who loved him in the complicated way of someone who was also still grieving, and Draco Malfoy was back in his world of practiced surfaces and inherited frameworks with a new reference point he didn't know what to do with yet. All of them heading, in September, to the same place. "Hagrid," Harry said. "Thank you. For today." Hagrid made a sound. It was the sound of someone who had been full of feelings all day and had just received one too many of the good kind. "Don't mention it," he managed. "Don't even, it was my honor, Harry." "Truly." Harry looked at him. "I mean it." It mattered. Hagrid went red. He looked at his umbrella. He looked at the sky. He said, in a voice that was working very hard, "Let's get you home before it rains again." They left the alley. Behind them, in Ollivander's shop, the old wand-maker stood at his window and watched them go with his pale eyes and his lifetime of attention to the particular, and when they were out of sight he went to his desk and made a notation in the record book that went back further than the shop itself. He wrote the name, the date, the wand specifications, and then he paused, pen in hand, thinking about 5 generations of fathers and sons keeping a wand for an unnamed owner and his grandfather's notation about something giving of itself. He wrote, in the margin, "He came back, then." As things do. He closed the book. He went back to his work. Outside, the last light of the afternoon made the wet cobblestones of Diagon Alley briefly, simply golden. Chapter 4, The Sorting of Something Ancient. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry was on it 20 minutes early. Not because he was anxious, he simply liked trains. The specific mechanical honesty of them, the weight and the track and the logic of going somewhere along a fixed line. He'd found his compartment, stowed his trunk, sat down by the window, and spent the 20 minutes watching platform 9 3/4 fill up with families doing the elaborate choreography of first departures, trunks and owls and tearful mothers and fathers trying to look like they weren't tearful and older siblings dispensing advice with varying degrees of sincerity. Hedwig, his owl, white and opinionated, who had arrived at the cottage 2 months ago via Hagrid with the particular self-possessed air of someone reporting to an assignment they'd chosen rather than been given, was in her cage on the rack above him and watching the platform with the focused attention of a creature cataloging useful information. Neville found him first. He appeared in the compartment doorway with his toad Trevor clasped in both hands and the expression of someone who'd already lost Trevor twice this morning and was committed to not losing him a third time. "Mind if there's not much room elsewhere," he said, and then Trevor made a determined bid for freedom and Neville grabbed him with the reflexes of extended practice. "Sorry. I'm Neville. We met in Diagon Alley." "I remember," Harry said. "Come in." Neville came in, sat down, repositioned Trevor into a more secure grip, and exhaled. "My gran gave me a speech this morning," he said. "About representing the family name. She does a very thorough speech." "What did you say?" "I said I would." He paused. And then Trevor got into her handbag. Harry looked at Trevor, who had the dignified expression of a toad with no regrets. "He has opinions." "Constantly," Neville said, with the exasperated fondness of someone who'd given up trying to change that. Hermione appeared 20 minutes after they'd left the station, sliding the compartment door open with the particular energy of someone who'd already done a thorough tour of the train for context. "I've been to 4 compartments," she announced, coming in and sitting down in the remaining window seat opposite Harry as if this had been established in advance. "The prefects say we should be in our robes by, oh, hello," she said to Neville. "Hermione Granger," Harry said. "Neville Longbottom." Hi, said Neville. Hello. She looked at Trevor. Is that a common Welsh toad? The coloring suggests common European, but the markings around the eyes are slightly different. He's a toad, Neville said, with the world-weariness of someone who had stopped trying to categorize Trevor. He escapes a lot. I've read that toads are underrated as familiars, Hermione said. Excellent magical conductors, apparently. Very old association with wizards. She already had a book open on her knee, a different one from the bookshop, Harry noticed, so the fifth book had apparently won the internal argument. She was reading and talking simultaneously with the ease of someone for whom these were not separate activities. Harry watched the three of them settle into the compartment and felt something he hadn't expected, a particular warmth that wasn't the amber gold kind, not the ancient deep warmth of the thing behind his sternum, but something newer and more fragile and, he discovered, more precious for being both. He looked out the window at the countryside rushing past, green and gray under September clouds, and thought about the word friends with the care of someone handling something they'd wanted for a long time and didn't want to be wrong about. He didn't think he was wrong. They talked through the journey, Hermione about her theory that the Hogwarts curriculum underemphasized theoretical foundations in favor of practical casting, which Harry agreed with and Neville listened to with the expression of someone filing the information under useful to know but slightly terrifying. Neville told them about his family's history with Hufflepuff, a great-uncle, a few cousins, and the way his grandmother talked about it in the tone people use for mild embarrassment that they've decided to accept gracefully. Harry told them about Hagrid, about the cottage in Wiltshire, about the 4 years of preparation without getting into the parts that would require longer explanations than a train journey allowed. At some point during the afternoon, Draco Malfoy appeared in the doorway with 2 large boys at his back. Harry had been expecting this, not the specific moment, just its general arrival. He'd thought about Draco since Madame Malkin's, the recalibration he'd watched happen in the blonde boy's face when his expected script hadn't fit the person in front of him. He was curious which version of Draco was going to come through the compartment door. Draco looked at the three of them. His eyes went to Harry immediately, then to Hermione and Neville in a quick assessment that Harry recognized as old-fashioned social categorization, blood status, family name, visible status markers. It was the assessment of a boy who'd been raised in a world where those things were the map. Potter, he said. Malfoy, Harry said. A pause. Draco glanced at Hermione, who was looking at him with the particular expression she apparently reserved for things that required formal assessment before judgment. He glanced at Neville, who was holding Trevor very steadily and looking back at Draco with a calmness that seemed to cost him something but was genuine. You might want to choose your company more carefully, Draco said. It came out with the precision of something rehearsed, but Harry could hear the hollow at the center of it, the way a phrase sounds when the person saying it is less certain of it than they're performing. I'm comfortable with my choices, Harry said pleasantly. Draco held his gaze. The 2 boys behind him, Crabbe and Goyle, broad and impassive, furniture with ambitions, shifted slightly. My father says the Longbottom family are, your father, Harry said, isn't here. Draco stopped. It wasn't a challenge in the way challenges are usually delivered, no heat, no edge, no invitation to escalate. Just a simple fact, offered clearly, in the same tone you'd use to point out the time. Draco heard it that way. Harry watched him hear it, watched the framework of the scene he prepared for fail to engage with the scene actually in front of him. He says a lot of things, Harry continued, and probably believes most of them, and some of them are probably even useful. But you're going to Hogwarts, not him. You'll need to work out what you think. He looked at Draco steadily. You're smart enough to do that. I noticed. Draco stared at him. Something moved in his gray eyes, complicated and quick and not quite resolvable into a single expression. I'll see you in the castle, he said finally. You will, Harry said. Draco left. His escort went with him. The compartment was quiet for a moment. That was interesting, Hermione said. He's working something out, Harry said. He was rude. He was reciting, Harry said. There's a difference. The rude part was the recitation. Underneath, he was actually curious. He thought about it. He'll be fine too. Hermione looked at him with an expression that said she was reserving judgment on this specific assessment. Neville looked at Trevor. Trevor appeared to agree with Harry, though his expression was, as always, difficult to read with certainty. They arrived at Hogsmeade Station as the sky went fully dark, and the carriages that weren't carriages, pulled by things Harry could see clearly and that he regarded with the recognition of someone encountering a distant relative, the Thestrals responding to his presence with their eyeless attention and the slight tilt of their terrible, elegant heads, took the older students up to the castle. The first years went with Hagrid, boats across the Black Lake, and Harry sat in a boat with Neville across from him and looked at Hogwarts as it came into view. It rose from the far shore the way things rise in the deep dreams, inevitable, complete, stone on stone going up into the night sky, lit warm from within, towers and battlements and the particular jagged skyline of something that had been added to over centuries by people who had strong opinions about architecture and no shared plan. It was enormous. It was old. It was the oldest inhabited structure Harry had been near in this life, and when he felt it from across the water, not looked at it, felt it, the way the ancient warm awareness of the place reached out across the lake and registered his presence in the boats, he felt it feel him back. It was unmistakably recognition. Not dramatic. Not a fanfare. Just the quiet, warm, solid sense of two things that knew each other meeting again after a significant interval. The castle breathed once, or something like it, a pulse in the stone, very deep, that made the water on the lake ripple outward in a ring from the far shore. Neville noticed the ripple. He looked at the water, then at Harry. He didn't say anything, but the look was curious and clear-eyed, the look of someone who noticed things and filed them for later without making an event of them. Harry liked that about him. Hagrid held up his lantern at the front of the flotilla and called out landmarks with the enthusiasm of a man who'd made this journey many times and still meant every word, and the boats made their way across the black water, and above the lake the castle waited. Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall. Harry's chest did something uncomplicated and warm when he saw her. She was his McGonagall, the one who'd sat across from him in a cottage for a year and made up new numbers and found different books and asked him honestly how he was doing. She stood at the front of the assembled first years with her hands folded and her tartan and her uncompromising spine and looked at each of them in turn, and when her eyes reached Harry she did not let her expression do anything that could be identified and catalogued, but something in her posture adjusted minutely, the way a structure settles when a particular load is placed where it was designed to receive it. "Welcome to Hogwarts," she said. Her speech, brief, precise, informative, delivered in the tone of someone who respected the intelligence of her audience too much to be condescending, covered the houses, the sorting, the importance of conduct. Harry listened and also, simultaneously, listened to the castle, because the castle was talking in the way that very old, very aware things talk, in sensation, in warmth and vibration and the slight shifts of air that meant attention. The ghosts came through the wall while McGonagall was gone to check on the Great Hall. Harry watched them with genuine interest, the nearly headless Nick, the fat friar, the bloody Baron materializing from stone and moving among the first years with the comfortable ease of residents encountering newcomers. The Baron hung back slightly, gliding at the edges of the group, and when Harry looked at him directly, the Baron stopped. He was the oldest of them. Harry could feel the age of him, the depth of it, the particular quality of something that had been in this castle for nearly 1,000 years. The Baron looked at Harry. And then, slowly, with the gravity of something that did very few things lightly, he inclined his head. Not a bow, too old and too proud for a bow. An inclination. An acknowledgement. Harry inclined his head back. The same depth. The same duration. None of the other first years noticed, or if they did, didn't know what they'd seen. McGonagall came back. They followed her toward the doors of the Great Hall. Harry heard Peeves before he saw him. The poltergeist's approach had a specific auditory texture, the mix of cackling and the sound of things being about to be thrown. He came rocketing around a corner ahead of the group with an armful of water balloons and the expression of someone who'd had a delightful plan for the past 40 minutes. He saw Harry. He stopped. Not slowed down, stopped. Dead in the air, water balloons hovering around him in arrested trajectory. His eyes, the particular unsettling eyes of a poltergeist, which don't quite track correctly, fixed on Harry and went wide, and then did something eyes shouldn't be able to do, which was go wider, and then Peeves the poltergeist, who had been terrorizing Hogwarts since before anyone could remember and who feared nothing and respected less, made a sound in the back of his non-existent throat that might have been a word or might have been pure instinct, dropped every single water balloon, and went through the nearest wall so fast that the stones themselves seemed to recoil. McGonagall stared at the wall. The first years stared at the wall. The water balloons hit the floor in a long, anticlimactic series of wet impacts. Said McGonagall, in the tone of someone experiencing something unprecedented and choosing to proceed professionally. Neville was looking at Harry. Harry looked back. Neville looked at the wall where Peeves had been. He looked at his shoes. He appeared to be having a quiet internal experience and handling it very well. They went into the great hall. The ceiling was showing a cloudy night sky, and the candles floated above the 4 long house tables, and every face in the room turned to look at the incoming first years, which was normal and expected. Then, halfway through the assembled first years walk toward the front of the hall, something less normal and expected happened. The candles changed. Not all of them, not in a sudden, dramatic way. But the ones above the center aisle, the ones in Harry's path, shifted from standard warm white to a deep amber gold, a color that moved through the wax and flame quietly, finding a temperature and settling there. They didn't go back. They just burned differently now, amber where they'd been white, and several students at the Ravenclaw table who'd been mid-conversation stopped and looked up at the ceiling with the expressions of people whose instruments had just registered something unexpected. Harry walked under the amber candles without looking up. The great hall looked back at him. He found the teacher's table and located Dumbledore, silver-bearded and blue-robed in the center, watching Harry with that particular quality of attention that was his most distinctive feature. Next to him, a small man in a turban who was sweating noticeably and whose eyes Harry noted were moving in a way that didn't track correctly, fixing on objects in the room briefly before sliding away, like a compass near something magnetic. The man's eyes hit Harry and flinched. Harry filed this. He found the one empty seat, next to a large man with a ruddy face and a magnificent mustache whom Harry correctly identified as Hagrid's chair and chose to stand rather than take it, and stood with the other first years in front of the stool and the ancient, battered, patched hat. Professor McGonagall unrolled her scroll and began to call names. Harry stood and watched the sorting and let the castle talk to him in its slow, warm way, feeling its attention like a hand on his shoulder, steady and old and genuine. He felt the magic in the walls, the specific quality of centuries of concentrated magical activity absorbed into stone, the way the castle's own sentience had grown from that accumulated energy, the way consciousness grows from complexity. It was very pleased with itself, he thought. Quietly, essentially pleased with being what it was. He thought he understood that. Hermione Granger was sorted into Gryffindor. She sat down at the red and gold table with the expression of someone trying to be calm about something they'd hoped for and was practicing being glad without being excessive about it. Draco Malfoy was sorted by a hat that barely touched his head before declaring Slytherin. Draco sat down at the green table with his expression carefully composed, and Harry caught the moment, just a moment, before the composure settled, when the relief of a predicted outcome and the slight hollow of an unexamined expectation met in his face and resolved him perfectly. Neville Longbottom was sorted into Gryffindor. The hat took a while, longer than Draco, longer than Hermione. It sat on Neville's head for nearly 2 minutes, during which Neville sat with his hands on his knees and his eyes open, and a quality of stillness that Harry had noticed before, that quality of someone who had learned to be still inside loud circumstances. When it called Gryffindor, Neville walked to the table with his head up and his shoulders back, and he sat down next to Hermione, and she said something to him, and he smiled his cautious opening smile. "Potter," Harry. The hall went quiet in the way that things go quiet when they're already quiet but want to be quieter. Harry stepped forward. He sat on the stool. Professor McGonagall reached for the sorting hat. The hat leaned away from her hand. Not dramatically, a slight shift, a subtle movement, the way something leans when it's attending to a different direction. McGonagall paused. She reached again. The hat, gently but unmistakably, leaned further away. It turned, on the stool, toward Harry. McGonagall lowered her hand. She stood very still. The hat looked at Harry. Harry looked at the hat. The hat said, in a voice that the whole hall could hear because it always projected, "Well." And then it was quiet for a long time. The great hall waited. 400 students and 24 teachers sat in the amber candlelight and did not make a sound. The hat said, "I've sorted kings and cowards, saints and terrors, every kind of clever and every kind of brave. I've had a good long look at most of what humanity produces and I thought I'd seen the range of it." A pause. I was working with an incomplete dataset. Somewhere in the hall, a fork clinked against a plate and went silent. "You don't need me," the hat said to Harry, and now it was just speaking to him, the public voice setting aside its theater for something more direct. "You know what you are. You know what you're doing here. The houses are a framework for what's still becoming, you're not still becoming." Another pause. "But you asked to come the normal way. You asked to be sorted the normal way. And you're sitting on this stool, which is the normal way." The hat's tone shifted, not warmer exactly, but somehow more personal, the voice of something that had lived in Hogwarts long enough to absorb something of its character. "The castle knows you. She told me, this morning, while the students were traveling. She said, tell him he's home." The hall was so quiet that the candles were audible, the tiny, intimate sounds of flames burning. Harry looked at the hat. He said, quietly enough that only the hat and the nearest students could hear, "Where do you think?" "Gryffindor," the hat said. "Not because of courage, you're beyond the need for that to be a defining category. But because of what Gryffindor has always really been about, underneath the courage business. It's about people who decide to be present. To be here, in the world, in the mess and the noise of it, rather than above it or apart from it. People who choose contact over distance." A pause. "You could have stayed distant. You've always had that option. You came back anyway." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, "All right," he said. "Gryffindor," the hat announced, loud and full, and the Gryffindor table erupted. Harry walked to it through the amber candlelight and sat down next to Neville, who said, "Well done," with a directness that had nothing performed about it, and Hermione said, "I knew it," which was a slight exaggeration of the truth, and they all knew it, and Harry sat at the table and felt the castle breathing warmly around him and thought, "Yes. Here." The food appeared and the feast began, and Harry ate with the appetite of someone who'd been in a boat in the cold and was very glad of roast chicken, and the hall filled with noise and warmth and the particular energy of a few hundred people who were all happy to be exactly where they were. Percy Weasley, Gryffindor prefect, red-haired, with the bearing of someone who decided responsibility was his defining characteristic and was going to be thorough about it, came to introduce himself and managed to be both impressive and slightly exhausting, which Harry thought was a difficult combination to achieve. The Weasley twins, Fred and George, identical and positioned in the hall with the specific geometry of people who'd unconsciously established lines of sight to every exit, had apparently already heard about the sorting hat speech, which was an impressive information velocity from one end of a great hall to the other, and looked at Harry across the table with expressions that contained admiration, assessment, and a quality of speculative calculation that Harry found immediately entertaining. "Right," said Fred, or George. They were introducing themselves in no particular order and with no apparent intention of helping with identification, so the hat talked. "It did," Harry said. "At length," said the other one. "Yes. About you being beyond categories. Something like that." "Interesting," they said, in unison, with the timing of people who'd practiced this but also just thought like this naturally. and Harry couldn't decide which it was, which made them more interesting. "We have questions," said Fred. "Many questions," said George. "Tomorrow," said Harry. They both grinned. They had good grins, the genuine article, not performance. "Tomorrow," they agreed. Ron Weasley, younger, sitting further down the table, who Harry had noticed watching him with a complicated expression throughout the sorting, appeared at Harry's elbow with the slightly overcorrected casualness of someone who'd decided to do something and was executing the decision at higher speed than it required. "I'm Ron," he said. "Weasley. We were on the platform together, I think. I saw you with Hagrid." "I know," Harry said. "Hello, Ron." Ron blinked. "Oh. Right." He sat down in the available space next to Hermione, who made room with the practiced ease of someone who's decided to be socially flexible this year. "I've heard, well, everyone's heard, most of it is probably inaccurate," Harry said. "Yeah," Ron said, in the tone of someone who wanted to ask questions but had clocked the queue already forming. "I figured. My family, my mum talks about your mum, actually. They were friendly, at school." Harry looked at him. The ginger hair, the slight shabbiness of his robes that he was pretending he hadn't noticed Harry noticing, the fundamental straightforwardness of his face. "I'd like to hear about her sometime. What your mum says." Ron's expression did something that resolved into simple, decent warmth. "Yeah. I'll write her tonight. She'll want to know, he stopped, reorganized. "She'll be glad you're here. Tell her thank you," Harry said. Ron looked at him, slightly uncertain what he was being thanked for. "For what?" "For talking about her," Harry said. "My mum. People don't usually, because they think he thought about how to say it. They think I might not want to." "And do you?" "Yes," Harry said. "Always." Ron nodded. He went back to his food with the quiet seriousness of someone who'd been given a task they intended to take seriously. The feast ended. The candles were still amber at the center of the hall when McGonagall led the Gryffindors away from the tables, and Harry walked with his new housemates through corridors that felt different from the outside of Hogwarts, older, warmer, more personally present, as if the interior of the castle had a personality distinct from its exterior impression. The portraits watched them pass. Several of them tracked Harry specifically, not all of them with recognition, but with the particular attention of things that had absorbed centuries of magic and could feel when something was more than it appeared. One portrait, a very old painting in a frame with no nameplate, depicting someone in robes that predated any style Harry had seen in historical texts, reached out one painted hand as Harry passed, and touched the surface of the canvas from the inside, and said something in a language that 3 nearby students heard as a sound and Harry heard as words. He paused. Turned. The portrait looked at him. The painted face was serious and direct. "I know," Harry said quietly. The portrait nodded and withdrew its hand. Neville, who'd been walking beside Harry, looked at the portrait, then at Harry, then kept walking. "You can ask," Harry said. "I know," Neville said. "I'm thinking about how." Harry appreciated this. Most people either asked immediately, without thinking about what they were actually asking, or decided not to ask, which was a different kind of avoidance. The deliberate, thoughtful pause before asking was a quality he filed under "this person respects the question." "What did it say?" Neville asked, when they'd turned a corner and the portrait was out of sight. "That it was glad I came back," Harry said. Neville was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you glad?" Harry looked at the corridor ahead, stone and torchlight and the enormous, warm, living presence of the castle around them. "Yes," he said. "Very good," Neville said, with the simplicity of someone for whom this was the correct and complete response. The Gryffindor common room was a rounded, warm, red and gold space that felt lived in the best way, the way of a room that had held a lot of people who'd brought themselves into it fully, over a long time, and left something of themselves in the walls. The fireplace was large and burning and going amber the moment Harry walked through the portrait hole, which Percy Weasley noted with raised eyebrows and decided to file under things he would think about later. Harry sat in the chair nearest the fire. Not because he was positioning himself or establishing territory, just because it was the nearest chair and he was tired in the particular pleasant way of a day full of real things. Hermione sat across from him with a book on her knee, which she opened and then didn't read for several minutes. Neville sat beside him. Ron sat on the floor by the hearth and started explaining Quidditch to no one in particular, which Harry had already read extensively about and said nothing, because the explanation was clearly partly for himself. "Harry," Hermione said. The hat said the castle told it something. "This morning." "Yes. That she'd been waiting." "That's what it said." She looked at him over her book. "The castle has been waiting for you specifically." "Apparently. And you're 9 years old." "Nearly 10. She held his gaze. She was working up to something. He could see it in the particular way she organized her thoughts before she asked things, the slight forward tilt, the squaring of the shoulders. "Who are you?" she asked. Not rudely. Not with accusation. With the specific, precise curiosity of a mind that had filed everything from the day, the sorting, the candles, the hat, the portrait, and was now asking the question that connected all of it. Harry looked at the fire. He thought about how honest to be. Not about whether to be honest, he was always honest, but about how much of the honest answer was appropriate for the first night in a new place, with new people, in a room full of students who might be listening. "I'm Harry Potter," he said. "And also something older." Both at once. He looked at her. "The older part is still, coming back. Finding the edges of itself. It's a process." Hermione absorbed this. The book closed. Her fingers rested on the cover. "Something older than wizards." "Much older. Than magic?" "No. Not than magic. Magic is very old." He looked at the amber fire. "About the same age as me, actually. Give or take." A long silence. "Okay," Hermione said finally. The word came out with the specific quality of a very analytical person deciding that some data requires a longer accumulation period before analysis is useful. "Okay. I have a lot of questions." "I know. Can I ask them gradually? As things come up?" "Yes." "Good." She opened her book again. "Thank you for being honest." "Thank you for asking properly," he said. The fire burned amber. The common room gradually quieted as students went to bed, the twins last, on their way to the stairs, turning back to Harry with identical looks that said this conversation is very much not over, which he acknowledged with a slight nod. Neville fell asleep in his chair before Ron finished his Quidditch explanation, which Ron accepted philosophically. Harry sat in his chair by the amber fire long after the others had gone up, and felt the castle breathe around him, slow, steady, old, and let himself simply be here, in this size, in this room, in this beginning. It was, he thought, a very good beginning. He put his hand in his pocket and felt the warmth of the scale, the cycling colors of something that remembered what he was. He held it for a moment in the dark of his pocket, the fire low, the common room quiet. Somewhere below, deep in the castle, something stirred on the 3rd floor in a room that most people believed was the most dangerous location in Hogwarts. The 3-headed dog currently assigned to that room, Fluffy, by name, belonging to Hagrid, enormous and bad-tempered, lifted 3 heads simultaneously from 3 separate sleeps, looked at the trapdoor it was guarding, and then looked up at the ceiling as if it could see through stone, and made a sound from all 3 throats at once that was not a bark or a growl but something lower and more fundamental. The sound of a large animal acknowledging a larger presence. Then all 3 heads went back to sleep. Through the stone floors and the portraits and the moving staircases and the torchlit corridors, the castle settled into its night around its newest student, and the warmth in its walls was not just the warmth of fires and inhabited spaces but something older and more specific, the warmth of recognition, the warmth of a long wait finally ended. The amber fire burned down to coals. The room was very quiet. Harry fell asleep in the chair. He dreamed big. Chapter 5, Fire and Philosophy. The first week of classes established several things with reasonable efficiency. Professor Flitwick taught charms from a stack of books he stood on to reach the board, and had the quality of someone who genuinely loved his subject enough that the love had become structural, woven into how he moved and spoke and looked at students when they got something right. Harry liked him immediately. The man had real precision, the kind that came from actually caring about the work rather than just the performance of expertise. Professor Sprout smelled of earth and had the cheerful directness of someone who'd spent so long with plants that she'd absorbed their essential philosophy: grow toward light, don't overthink the soil. She called Harry by his name from the first day without making anything of it, which he appreciated more than she probably knew. Snape was a different matter entirely. Harry had read about him. Dumbledore had mentioned him, carefully, in the way Dumbledore mentioned things he wanted Harry to form his own conclusions about, providing facts while withholding editorial, which Harry respected as a method even when he found it occasionally transparent. Potions Master, head of Slytherin, skilled and complex and carrying a history that had shaped him into something not quite cruel but adjacent to it in ways he clearly no longer troubled to examine. He came into the dungeon classroom on Thursday morning, said nothing while everyone settled, wrote a list of potion ingredients on the board in a hand that was precise and slightly violent, and then turned to face the room. "You are here," he said, in a voice calibrated to make silence feel significant, "to learn the science and the art of potions. There will be no hand-holding. There will be no points awarded for enthusiasm. There will be quiet, careful, correct work, or there will be nothing." Harry found him interesting. He had the quality of someone who'd built his entire professional persona around the certainty that most people would disappoint him, which meant the persona served primarily as armor against disappointment rather than as any genuine statement about teaching philosophy. It was a sad way to organize yourself. Snape opened the register. He moved through names with the mechanical boredom of someone performing a ritual they'd long since stopped believing in. He reached Harry's name and paused, a deliberate pause, not the pause of someone who'd lost their place, but the pause of someone about to perform. "Ah," he said. "Harry Potter. Our new celebrity." The class was very still. Harry looked at Snape calmly. "Professor. Tell me, Potter, since you've no doubt read all your books and believe yourself prepared, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "Draught of living death," Harry said. Asphodel being a lily, which combined with wormwood creates a compound that targets the nervous system's signaling architecture at the cellular level and suspends it, rather than destroying it. That's why it produces sleep rather than actual death. It's a reversible suspension if administered correctly. He paused. The historical name is a reference to asphodel's association with mourning in classical tradition. It's a bit melodramatic as pharmaceutical naming goes. A silence. "And where," Snape said, his voice carrying no particular inflection, "would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" "Stomach of a goat. Most apothecaries keep them. They're impractical as antidotes for anything sophisticated. They work through generalized toxin binding rather than targeted treatment, which makes them useful for emergencies and fairly crude for anything more complex. You'd want them for fast response to an unknown poison while you work out what the actual treatment should be." Another silence. This one longer. "What is the difference," Snape said, with the slowness of someone adjusting their approach in real time, "between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "They're the same plant," Harry said. "Also called aconite. The three names are used differently in different traditions: monkshood in Western herbal medicine, wolfsbane in the magical creature treatment tradition, aconite in formal apothecary practice. The variation reflects the different communities that developed uses for it independently." He looked at Snape steadily. "Is there a specific application you want to discuss? I find the theoretical questions more interesting with context." Snape looked at him. Harry looked back. The class was watching this exchange with the particular frozen quality of students witnessing something they weren't sure how to categorize, not the standard humiliation of a teacher dominating a student, not the satisfying reversal of a student getting the better of a teacher, but something else, a conversation happening at a level slightly above the surrounding temperature of the room. Snape turned back to the board. 5 points to Gryffindor, he said, which landed on the class like an entirely unexpected piece of weather. For thorough preparation. He began explaining the day's actual assignment, a basic boil-cure potion, standard first-year opening material, and did not call on Harry again. After class, in the corridor, Hermione fell into step beside him. "That was remarkable," she said. "He's good at his subject," Harry said. "He just expected me to be bad at it. Most people would have frozen up. He was asking real questions. Freezing seems like the wrong response to a real question." She considered this. "He doesn't like you." "He's deciding," Harry said. "There's a difference." Ron, on Harry's other side, made a sound that suggested he was less optimistic about the distinction but was choosing his battles. He'd spent the week making these choices with increasing sophistication, which Harry thought was impressive for someone who'd clearly arrived with the social confidence of someone who'd never had to try very hard at it and was now recalibrating. Flying lessons happened on a clear Thursday afternoon with the Slytherins, on the dew-damp grass of the training pitch, under the instruction of Madame Hooch, sharp-eyed, yellow-eyed, impatient with drama, tolerant of genuine effort. Harry stood beside his broom and looked at it with the feeling of someone seeing something familiar in an unexpected context, the way you might look at a word in a foreign language and realize you know its root. Flying was not the same as what he knew from the deep dreams. Not even close. But the principle beneath it, the essential rightness of height, the body's memory of what it meant to be above things, resonated with something very old. "Up," said Harry. The broom came up. It came up fast, not leaping, not the standard wavering rise of a broom meeting a beginner, but snapping straight into his hand with the decisive movement of something very glad to be used properly, and then holding absolutely still, because whatever it was reading from him was telling it to wait. Around him, brooms were wobbling and falling and refusing to move. Neville's took him 15 feet up and then threw him sideways into the grass. Harry looked up at the sky. He mounted the broom. The first push was all he needed. He went up like a held breath released, clean and fast, finding the altitude with the ease of someone accessing a remembered skill through new equipment. He went higher than Madame Hooch had specified, not ignoring the instruction, just forgetting it, the way you forget to be careful when something feels utterly natural. The pitch fell away below him. The castle filled his right side, warm and stone-gray and amber-windowed. The ground spread out green and September gold, the lake dark at the far edge, the forest beginning past it. He held the broom still at 100 feet and breathed. It was nothing like the dream. It was also everything like the dream, in miniature, in the way that a single clear note is everything like music without being music itself. He didn't need this, didn't need the broom, could do without the altitude, wasn't defined by any of it. But it was good. It was simply, clearly, uncomplicated good. He came back down because Madame Hooch was calling him back down, and he was at school, and school had rules, and he respected rules that had reasonable purposes, and the rule about not going too high had the reasonable purpose of not having students fall off brooms, which he wouldn't do but which the rule couldn't know about. He landed next to Neville, who had grass in his hair and the expression of someone having a mixed relationship with gravity. "You can fly," Neville said. "Apparently. You looked like," Neville paused, looking for the word. "Like you were supposed to be up there." "I was," Harry said simply. He helped Neville up. "You'll get it. I fell off going sideways. Brooms are inconsistent in the first 2 feet. Get past that and you'll be fine." He handed Neville his broom back. "Don't grip the handle like a life decision. Hold it like a railing, firm enough to not fall, loose enough to adjust." Neville tried it. His broom rose 3 feet and held. He looked down at Harry with the cautious expression of someone not yet ready to be pleased. "There," Harry said. "Stay there. That's good." Neville stayed there, 3 feet up, gripping his broom like a railing rather than a life decision, and looked around with the tentative wonder of someone discovering that the feared thing is actually survivable. From the other side of the pitch, Draco's voice carried across the grass. "Longbottom actually managed 3 feet. Remarkable. Next they'll teach him to walk." The laugh from his end of the group was the trained response laugh, the one people produce when the person with social authority makes a noise and they've learned to treat it as a cue. Harry looked at Draco across the pitch. Draco met his gaze, and something that had been in his expression, the automatic pleasure of the successful put-down, registered Harry's look and flickered. Harry said nothing. He just held Draco's gaze for a moment, steady and clear and with no heat in it, just the specific kind of attention that says I see what you just did and I see why you did it and neither of us is impressed by it. Draco looked away first. He reset his expression to something smoother and looked up at his broom and said nothing more. Neville came down from 3 feet and stood beside Harry and did not comment on the exchange, which meant he'd noticed it. "Thank you," Neville said. "For the grip thing." "Any time," Harry said. It was the defense against the dark arts classroom where Harry's attention fully engaged. Professor Quirrell. Small, turbaned, permanently damp at the forehead, with the speech pattern of someone performing anxiety, the stutter, the apologetic forwardness, the way he laughed too quickly at his own misdirection. Harry had clocked him at the feast, filed him, and spent a week in the adjacent awareness that something was profoundly wrong in a specific way. The turbaned head. The wrongness underneath it. Not just dark magic, Harry could feel dark magic around half the artifacts in the castle and simply noted their locations. This was different. This was a presence he'd been listening to for years through a thin, scarred membrane on his forehead, a presence that pressed against the boundary of his consciousness at night and found the boundary entirely non-negotiable. He recognized Voldemort the way you recognize a voice you've heard for years finally attached to a face. He sat in the defense class and watched Quirrell explain the basic theory of a shield charm with the specific, mounting wrongness of someone performing a character they decided to present, the stammering, the nervous adjustments of the turban, the deflected eye contact. The class took notes and asked tentative questions and took the performance at face value, because the performance was thorough and because most 10-year-olds had not spent 4 years sitting with the particular frequency of a fractured dark soul pressed against their consciousness. Hermione sat to his left, already 2 steps ahead on the theory and writing her own supplementary notes in the margins of the official notes. She glanced at Harry once, something in his expression catching her attention, and the look she gave him was sharp and questioning and he gave her a small, slightly reassuring shake of his head that meant not now. After class, in the corridor, she pulled him slightly aside from the general flow of students. "What was that?" she said quietly. "The professor," Harry said, equally quiet. She looked at him. The quick, systematic intelligence working. "He's not what he seems." "He's not what he seems," Harry agreed. "What is he?" "Something I need to understand better before I do anything about it." He looked down the corridor where Quirrell had already disappeared in the direction of his office. "He's not going to hurt anyone in the near future. He's building to something. He has time." He looked at Hermione. "I'm going to read ahead." "In what?" "Everything relevant to what he wants." He started walking. "Do you know what's on the 3rd floor?" She fell into step beside him. "The corridor that's forbidden. The notice at the beginning of term, something is being kept there. Protected." He'd known since the feast, the deep, warm attention of the castle had one spot of specific tension in it, a held breath placed 3 floors up on the east side. "I want to know what it is." "Dumbledore knows you're here," Hermione said carefully. "If it's being kept here, he's involved." "I know." Harry thought about Dumbledore, the monthly meetings, the careful honesty, the plans within plans. "He'll tell me if I ask directly." "Will he?" "He's gotten better at it." He paused. I'll ask him this weekend. She was quiet for a moment. Should I be worried? Harry considered the question properly. About Quirrell? Not immediately. About what he's trying to reach? Possibly. He looked at her. But that's why it's useful to know. How do you know he's trying to reach something? He could be, Hermione, Harry said. He has Voldemort growing out of the back of his head. She stopped walking. She blinked. What? Voldemort. Currently existing as a partial soul, parasitic, attached to Quirrell's body. The turban hides the face. He said it in the same register he'd have used to explain a potion formula, clear, direct, without theatrical weight. I've been aware of his presence for a while. That's the first time I've been in the same room with him. Hermione stood in the corridor with her books and her excellent mind and the expression of someone whose threat assessment model had just been retroactively expanded by about 10 categories. Harry, she said. Yes. Voldemort is literally in this school. On the back of a professor's head, yes. And you, she stopped. Reorganized. What do you want to do about it? Find out what he wants, Harry said. Then make a decision. She looked at him. That long, clear, analytical look she'd been developing since the bookshop, the one that tried to find the gap between what she knew and what the situation required. You're not afraid of him. No. Most people would be. Most people should be, Harry said. He's very dangerous to most people. He met her gaze. I'm a different category. She filed this. She recalibrated. She started walking again, because Hermione Granger's response to information requiring extended processing was to keep moving until the processing finished. I'm going to want to understand more, she said. Eventually. When you're ready to explain. I know, he said. You're good at waiting for the right question. She almost smiled. The real one, not the almost. I'm practicing. October arrived and the castle went warm gold in the afternoons, the kind of light that has personal opinions about stone and expresses them generously. Harry's schedule settled into the rhythms of it, classes and meals and the common room in the evenings and the long, interesting conversations that accumulated between the four of them in the particular way of people who are discovering they think well near each other. Fred and George Weasley had made themselves a consistent presence in Harry's orbit. They were exactly what they appeared to be, which Harry found immediately trustworthy. They had a consistent internal logic that was all their own, a shared understanding of the world's comedic architecture that made them genuinely funny rather than performatively funny, which was a meaningful distinction. They were also, under the comedy, sharper than their grades suggested and considerably more strategic than their casual energy implied. They'd asked their questions. He'd answered them partially, enough to establish honesty without requiring a full accounting, and they'd received this with the equanimity of people who valued the partial truth now over the potential of a complete truth later. So you're very old, George had said, at one point, in the common room late on a Tuesday. In some sense, Harry said. But you're also 10. Also that. And the castle knows you. The castle's been very welcoming. Fred looked at the ceiling, which had been doing amber things in the evenings with increasing frequency, which the other Gryffindors had started treating as a normal feature of the common room, the way you adjust to any constant. Does she talk? Not in words, Harry said. In warmth. Attention. The way temperature changes in a room when something important has happened. We've noticed things, George said carefully. Around school. Things that change when you're near them. I've noticed you noticing, Harry said. They grinned. We have a map, Fred said. Work in progress. Comprehensive. Shows everything that moves in the castle. He looked at George. We keep having to revise sections. Because of me? Harry asked. Because of what the castle does because of you, George clarified. Corridors that weren't there on Tuesday. A staircase that started going somewhere different since September. Harry looked at them. What's it connecting now? They both looked at him with an expression he'd come to enjoy, the look they wore when reality exceeded their already expansive model of what reality might do. The third-floor corridor, Fred said. East side. Harry was quiet for a moment. Helpful, he said. He asked Dumbledore on Saturday morning, by owl, which was the established protocol for their standing meetings. The owl came back within an hour with a reply that was brief, come this afternoon. I'll have tea. The gargoyle outside the headmaster's office had stopped requiring the password when Harry came. It simply moved. Harry had decided not to mention this to anyone. Dumbledore was behind his desk when Harry came in, surrounded by the portraits and the instruments and the silver threads of smoke rising from devices Harry had catalogued over the previous years. Fawkes was on his perch and made a sound when Harry entered, a warm, clear note, the sound of recognition between things that shared a fundamental quality. Harry sat in a chair across the desk. The Philosopher's Stone, he said. Dumbledore's teacup lowered a fraction. You know what it is. Flamel's stone. Grants effective immortality through the elixir of life. Flamel and his wife have been using it for 600 years. He paused. I knew Nicholas, once. A long time ago. Very determined man. He looked at Dumbledore. You moved it here because someone was trying to reach it at Gringotts. There was a break-in, Dumbledore said, setting down his cup. In August. Quirrell. A pause. You know. I've known since the feast, Harry said. The soul fragment attached to his host is something I've been peripherally aware of for most of my life. It's not subtle, once you know the frequency. He looked at the instruments on Dumbledore's desk. You moved the stone here to protect it, and then you protected it with a series of obstacles designed to be challenging for a student or a moderate practitioner. Yes. But not for Voldemort. No, Dumbledore said quietly. Not for Voldemort. Harry looked at him. There's a reason for that. The long pause of a man deciding. Then, the original plan, Dumbledore said, with the particular careful honesty that had been growing between them over 4 years, relied on you reaching the stone. A young person with power but inexperience, who would see themselves in the mirror of Erist but would not take the stone for themselves, only someone who wanted it but not for use could retrieve it. The mirror was the final protection. The stone would materialize in their pocket, and Voldemort, in whatever form he'd arrived with, would be defeated again. He folded his hands on the desk. The plan was designed around a child who would be brave but limited. Who would have to struggle through the obstacles? Who would reach the mirror in extremis and be protected by wanting the right things? Harry looked at him for a long moment. And instead you got me. And instead I got you, Dumbledore agreed. I could walk to the stone right now, Harry said. The obstacles are interesting, some of them. The logic puzzle is excellent, genuinely. But none of them would stop me. I know. The plan's scaffolding is built for a different person. Yes. Dumbledore looked at him over his spectacles. Which is why I'm asking you, Harry, not directing, not planning around you, asking, what do you want to do? Harry sat with this for a moment. Through the window of the office, the grounds were November gray, the lake flat and dark, the forest standing still. He thought about Quirrell, the performance of the stutter, the apologetic forwardness, the turban hiding something that had been called the most dangerous dark wizard of the age. He thought about Voldemort. The intelligence he'd felt pressing against his consciousness, the fear underneath the architecture of it, the genuine brilliance of a mind that had chosen a very particular prison. I want to talk to him, Harry said. Dumbledore was very still. Not yet, Harry said. Not before I understand more. But eventually, the conversation he and I need to have is the one nobody's been willing to have with him, which is why everything keeps escalating. He paused. He's afraid of dying. That's the engine of everything he's done. And his solution to being afraid of dying was to try to make himself impossible to kill, which is not actually a solution to the fear, it's just a method of avoiding the question. He looked at the window. You can't give someone who's afraid of dying the elixir of life. All you do is give them more time to be afraid. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that was not quite the look Harry was used to from him, not the assessing, layered thing, but something more direct. Something that was simply listening. What would be a solution? Dumbledore asked. I don't know yet, Harry said honestly. I need to understand him better. I need the conversation. He looked back at Dumbledore. In the meantime, the stone needs to be more protected. Not because I can't handle Quirrell, I can, but because there's no reason to let the situation develop to a crisis point when it doesn't need to. What do you suggest? Tell Flamel to destroy it. The stone. He's had 600 years. His wife too. He thought about Nicholas Flamel, the determined face, the years of correspondence between them that were in the deep vault in a box he hadn't fully opened yet. He's always known this day would come. He's the kind of man who would have been preparing for it. The stone being destroyed removes Voldemort's immediate objective and forces him to try a different approach, which will be more revealing about what he actually wants. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. You're asking an old man and his wife to accept death. I'm asking two people who've had 600 years to be alive to make a choice they've always had the option of making, Harry said. That's different. He met Dumbledore's gaze. You know it is. Another long silence. The instruments ticked and murmured. Fawkes ruffled his feathers once. I'll write to Nicholas, Dumbledore said. Good. Harry stood. And Dumbledore, he paused. Quirrell is aware of me. Voldemort is aware of me. He's been aware of me since the feast, I felt it, the moment he registered my presence, the shock of it. He doesn't know what to do with the information yet. No. He'll do something, Harry said. Something probing. He doesn't like uncertainty. He thought about it. It might be the troll. Dumbledore's expression shifted fractionally. What troll? On Halloween, Harry said. There was something in the way Quirrell was moving around the periphery of the castle last week. Testing exits. Looking for a diversion. He paused. You might want to have a plan. He left the headmaster's office. The gargoyle moved aside. The staircase spiraled him down. Halloween arrived cold and bright-skied, the castle decorated with live bats and enchanted pumpkins the size of small boulders in the entrance hall, the smell of warm food drifting from the great hall in the particular way that makes even adults feel temporarily young. Harry was aware of Quirrell leaving the feast approximately 7 minutes in, and he made a decision in the span of about 4 seconds. I need to tell you something, he said to Neville, on his right. Neville looked at him. There's going to be a troll. Neville put down his fork. He had the commendable quality of not asking for lengthy explanations when a situation was moving. Where? Moving from the dungeons toward the 3rd floor, Harry said. Quirrell is releasing it as a distraction. Probably already has. He looked at Hermione, across the table. Hermione. 3rd floor, east side. I need you with me. She met his eyes. He watched her process the tone, the precision, the absence of uncertainty. She put her napkin down. Right, she said. Ron, next to Hermione, looked between them. Stay here, Harry said. He thought about it. Or come. Your choice. He was already moving. Ron came. Of course he came. He had the quality of someone who, when things accelerated too, which was either bravery or stubbornness or some combination that was difficult to distinguish from the outside. They were in the corridor before McGonagall noticed their absence and 2 corridors away before Quirrell's voice echoed in the great hall, Troll, in the dungeons, thought you ought to know. The castle's awareness around Harry shifted, a pulse of something that was almost concern, the way a very large thing paying attention tightens its attention when something goes wrong. He felt it through his feet on the stone. "It's between us and the third floor," Neville said, from behind Harry. "I know," Harry said. He turned a corner and stopped. The mountain troll was enormous, greenish-gray, smelling powerfully of something that existed at the intersection of old sweat and mud, swinging a club in the corridor with the loose, dangerous ease of something that knew it was the biggest thing in most rooms and had organized its entire personality around this fact. It was currently attempting to fit its club through the door of a girl's bathroom and had gotten the angle slightly wrong and was addressing this problem with increased force. "Okay," Ron said, from behind Harry. His voice was steady. "Points to Ron." "Back," Harry said, to the three of them. He walked forward. The troll turned. It looked at Harry. It had the small, certain eyes of a creature whose problem-solving methodology was strictly percussive. It sized him up, 9 years old, small, not a threat by any metric the troll's neurological architecture had evolved to use. It swung the club. Harry put his hand up. The club stopped. Not caught, Harry's hand wasn't touching it. It simply stopped, mid-arc, the way a pendulum stops when the clock is turned off. The troll looked at the arrested club. It looked at Harry. Something in the small, certain eyes became uncertain. Harry looked at it steadily. "Leave," he said. The voice was not the voice of a 9-year-old. It was the deeper resonance, the one that made rooms vibrate sympathetically, and Harry hadn't let it out since the early days in Wiltshire when he'd been still learning to control the register. He'd had good reason to bring it here. Trolls were old things, not intelligent by human measure but old enough to have something in them that remembered the deep grammar of the world, that recognized authority when it spoke from the right source. The troll made a sound from deep in its chest. It took one step back. Its club was still suspended in the air, and Harry let it down gently, lowering his hand, and the club met the stone floor with a soft thud rather than a crash. The troll left. It turned and went back the way it came with the careful, uncertain movements of a very large thing that had just recalibrated its understanding of rooms. Hermione came out of the bathroom doorway. She'd gone in before the troll arrived. Harry had known she was there. The third floor east side was where the castle's tension was, and Hermione had headed there ahead of them when she'd understood what was happening. She looked at the retreating troll. She looked at Harry. "Troll," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "You," she pointed at where the club had hung in the air. "Yes. With your hand." It was more the voice than the hand, Harry said. The hand was just, directional. Neville came up beside him and looked at the corridor where the troll had disappeared. "Did you tell it to leave and it left?" "Yes." "Because it understood you?" "Because it remembered what I am," Harry said. "The way old things remember things. Without thinking about it." Ron said, in a voice that was processing events at speed, "That was, I was going to levitate the club. I had the spell ready." He looked at Harry. "I had the spell ready." "I know," Harry said. "I saw. It was good thinking. I wasn't fast enough." "You were fast enough for a troll that needed levitating," Harry said. "This one needed something else." He looked at Ron. "Your instinct was right. Your preparation was right. The situation was just specifically mine." He paused. "If it had been 2 trolls, I'd have needed your spell." Ron looked at him. A long, careful look, the kind that was checking whether this was pity or honesty. He'd been doing that, occasionally, checking Harry against the image he'd been given of the boy who lived, looking for gaps or inconsistencies. He found, repeatedly, that there weren't any, which was apparently the most surprising outcome. He exhaled. "Right," he said. "Yeah." He tucked his wand away. "Let's go back before McGonagall notices. She's definitely noticed." McGonagall was in the corridor 2 turns back, arriving with Snape slightly behind her and both of them wearing the expression of people who'd expected to be solving a crisis and had found something different. She looked at the four of them. Then at the empty corridor where the troll had been. The troll, she said. It left, Harry said. Went back the way it came. A pause. You persuaded it to leave. Yes. McGonagall looked at Snape. Snape looked at the corridor where the troll had been. Then he looked at Harry with the particular expression he'd been developing over the weeks, not the one he used for most students, not even the one from the potions classroom, but a new one, still being worked out, the expression of a man who'd spent his life being one of the most capable people in a room and was encountering an experience that required significant personal adjustment. Detention, McGonagall said. Professor? Harry said. For being in the corridors during a lockdown, she said, with the firmness of someone who understands that rules exist for reasons and those reasons don't stop applying just because the person being held to them could level a building. All four of you. Next Saturday. However, a pause. A slight adjustment. 10 points each. 4. She looked at the empty corridor. Presence of mind. Thank you, Professor, Harry said. She held his gaze for a moment, and this was the McGonagall he knew, not the professional distance of the classroom but the person who'd sat across from him in a cottage for a year and called him directly on things and meant it when she said well done. Her expression said something she wasn't going to say out loud, with Snape present and 4 students watching, but which Harry received clearly nonetheless. He gave her a small nod. She straightened. Back to the feast, she said, to all of them. Now. They went. Walking back through the corridors, Neville fell in beside Harry. After a while, quietly, you could have done that from the start. Even before we got here. You could have handled it from the Great Hall, probably. Harry looked at him. Yes. But you let us come. You wanted to come, Harry said. That matters. Neville was quiet for a moment. It matters to you. It matters to me, Harry said. The choice. Being here, being part of things. He thought about the Sorting Hat's words, people who choose contact over distance. I could do this from somewhere very far above everything. I've always had that option. He looked at the corridor ahead, the torchlit stone, the warm amber of it. I'm not interested in that. Neville nodded slowly. He had the look he got when something had resolved inside him, not an expression you could easily see, more a quality of presence, a settling. I'm glad you're here, he said. Just that. No embellishment. Me too, Harry said. They went back to the feast. The great hall was warm and full of voices, the enchanted candles burning steady, and somewhere beneath the school a corridor was slightly emptier than it had been, and the third floor east side still had its held-breath tension, and in the Gringotts' vault the fires burned in their stone dishes, old and patient and absolutely certain. And at the head table, behind the stammer and the turban and the apologetic performance, something cold and brilliant and very frightened felt what had happened in the corridor 3 floors up and went entirely, completely still. Thinking.